Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Adriana sat at home waiting for her mother and father to come home from work. They worked at the poultry farm as laborers. Adriana had already heated her parents' dinner and looked out of her relative's window. Soon the 17-year-old girl saw her mother, followed by her father. Adriana smiled and ran to open the front door. As soon as her parents walked in, Adriana said she wanted to talk to them over dinner. The head of the family looked at her daughter with a stern look and asked, "I hope the conversation is not about your pregnancy." "Daddy, again you have failed to make a joke." A little irritated, said the daughter, who already knew her father's gaze and always distinguished when the gaze is angry. And when deliberately angry in such a situation, the man was not angry. The head of the family on the daughter's answer laughed and said, "You know me and my mother is peeled. Okay, let's set the table and talk over dinner." Soon the family was sitting in the kitchen and talking peacefully. When dinner was about to end, the girl's father asked his daughter what exactly she wanted to say. Adriana hesitated a bit and said that she had changed her mind about going to medical school and wanted to become an interior designer. When the father heard this, he was amazed, because his daughter had been dreaming about medicine since she was 16 years old. And then, when it is already necessary to go to enroll, she changes her mind. And he asked, "Why you choose this particular direction in our village in this specialty? You obviously do not get a job." "I know that, but maybe I'll be lucky enough to make my personal life in the city. And to be honest, I don't really want to go back to the village where there's no future. You're the one who started dreaming about a prince on a white horse, but you are not yet 18 to think about it," said the girl's mother. "Mom, Dad, but I'll be 18 on September 1st, and I'm not saying that I'm going to the city to arrange my personal life right now. Right now, I want to major in design." Parents. The girls looked at each other, and the head of the family did not object to his daughter's choice. He told his wife that Adriana has the right to decide what she wants to be in the future. Adriana's mother looked at her child, then hugged her and asked her to keep her head in the city. The girl gratefully hugged each parent in turn. Soon Adriana left for the city where she enrolled in college to study design. The girl was given a dormitory as a non-resident. She immediately made friends with her roommate, and soon Adriana began her studies. In college, Adriana especially became friends with fellow student Betty, who lived in this city with her parents. Adriana liked this girl with her carefree character. Time moved imperceptibly, and now the winter vacation was approaching. A week before Adriana's departure to the village, Betty suggested to her to go and sit in a cafe. Adriana supported her friend's idea, as she didn't often visit such places due to lack of money. Her parents sent her some money, but they quickly ran out. Soon the students were sitting in a cafe and discussing how they would celebrate the new year. Betty said that she would go to a nightclub where she would have a good time. Adriana said sadly that she did not have such an opportunity because they had not yet built such entertainment places in the village. Betty looked at her in amazement and then asked, "How do you have fun there? Young people usually go to the club on weekends for discos." "Well, it sucks. I don't envy the villagers," Betty said with a laugh. The girls continued to talk to each other as two young men approached them and offered them company. Betty looked at the boys. Then she looked at Adriana as if to ask if she would be willing to be introduced. Adriana nodded and let her friend know she was okay with it. And in just a few minutes, the guys had already joined the girls. One of the young men was called Constantine, and the other Stephen. Adriana immediately took notice of Stephen, and the whole evening was sneaking glances at him. Adriana also noticed that her friend liked this guy. Some more time passed, and Adriana told the company that it was time for her to go to the dormitory. The young men sighed disappointedly, and Constantine said that he and his friend had hoped to go for a longer walk. Adriana responded by suggesting that they should meet tomorrow and just walk outside. Stephen, having heard the suggestion, took up the idea, and then he drove Adriana to the dormitory and then Betty home in his car. Adriana was already lying down to rest. thinking about her new acquaintance, when she received a call on her cell phone from a friend. Betty excitedly described how she had a long conversation with Stephen when saying goodbye. Adriana unknowingly felt jealous of the boyfriend, and suddenly she said, "Classmates, why are you telling me this now? I want to bring it to your attention that I like Stephen, and I saw you looking at him in the cafe. So I'm going to ask you to turn your attention to his friend. Don't tell me what to do. And you're right to point out that I was looking at him because I liked him too. Now I will bring it to your attention that Stephen is an adult, and it's up to him to decide who he wants to spend his time with," Adriana said sharply, and immediately disconnected the connection. The next day, the girls met at the college. They felt that a cat had run between them and did not communicate especially strongly. And in the evening of the same day, when the girls met with their boyfriends, the young men noticed that the girls tried not to communicate with each other. Stephen at first tried to defuse the situation, and then asked what fly had bitten you both. "Yesterday was so much fun, and today it's like a day of mourning. Why don't we break into pairs? I want to go out with Adriana." And after the last sentence, he turned to Adriana and asked, "Do you mind?" "Of course not." With a smile, the girl answered, and looked triumphantly at her friend, who smirked wryly and said quietly, "But it's on. Go for a walk." Adriana got into the car to Stephen, and they went for a drive around the evening city. In the car, the young man asked the girl to tell about herself. She complied with his request, and then the man asked what had happened between the girls. Adriana, "Shit," she said to herself as she did not know what to answer. In the meantime, Stephen looked questioningly at Daddy, said a little fight they had. Asking what for? Since I won't tell you anyway. Okay, I won't ask. And anyway, you found out all about me. Why, I don't know your background yet. The young man laughed and said that he kept more about himself on purpose so that there was a reason to meet again. The young woman liked his answer, but insisted that he tell her about himself. From the narrative, Stephen Adriana learned that he is 27 years old, works in a bank. He lives with his mother, but is going to buy a 2-room apartment within a month. About his father, the guy said that his father died last year. And also the young man said that he was married. The marriage lasted only a year. The girl, having heard that Stephen was divorced, asked why he separated from his wife. The interlocutor, after a little thought, replied, "There is a reason that is most often used by people who want to divorce. It is called so. They did not match their characters. I hope that your curiosity satisfied." After a while, the girl said she had to go to the hostel. The man drove Adriana home, and when she was about to get out of the car, he pulled her to him and wanted to kiss her. Adriana pushed the new acquaintance away from her and asked indignantly what he was doing. Stephen looked at the girl perplexed and simply replied that he wanted to kiss the now Adriana. She looked at the young man in amazement and mumbled, "Is it customary for you to kiss a girl on the lips on the second day of acquaintance? What's wrong with that? But we hardly know each other to kiss already," she said quietly. "If you don't want to, I won't. Okay, let's say goodbye. I gotta go too. We'll see each other again, of course, but only after a while, because I have to go on a business trip. I'm going to my parents' house in a few days too. You will call me for sure." Soon, Adriana went to her parents' house in the countryside. She stayed there for the winter vacation. During this time, the guy called her on New Year's Eve, and one more time. The girl was worried that her relationship with Stephen might not work out. She had already realized that she had fallen in love with this man with all her heart. Soon Adriana arrived for her studies. At college, she met up with a friend she hadn't spoken to since Stephen had suggested a walk through the pears. Adriana thought that their conflict with her friend had already passed during the winter break. So without a second thought, she approached Betty and asked how the girl had celebrated New Year's Eve. Betty arrogantly glanced at her classmate and said, "Why are you wondering? My time about driving. Although I can tell you that I've had a good time these days. I went out with Stephen a couple times. He should be here tomorrow. By the way, what do you mean you met him?" Adriana asked in bewilderment. You've gone to the country. So he suggested that we spend some leisure time together, and I didn't refuse. Adriana walked away from Betty in silence. She felt a wave of hatred rising in her soul towards her friend, but not towards the young man. Adriana blamed Betty for everything. She believed that it was her classmate who initiated these meetings. After studying, Adriana hurried to the dormitory. She couldn't wait to call her lover, and as soon as she found herself in the room, she immediately dialed Stephen. And when she heard his voice, she asked when he was coming. The guy was surprised at the girl's call and answered that in 2 days, and Adriana asked the question that worried her the most. Tell me, why did you go out with me? You like Betty, don't you? You're strange, but I liked you. That's why we went out. Let me come over and we'll talk about it. Soon Stephen arrived in town and he met the girl. He looked at Adriana, who had her head down, looking at her hand. The man asked the girl why she had called earlier with this topic of conversation. Adriana kept silent as she did not want to admit to the guy that she was in love with him. And when Stephen pulled the girl to himself and kissed her passionately on the lips, she did not pull away, because at that moment she realized that if she pushed the men away now, Stephen would just leave and never come back. The guy kissed Adriana for a long time, and then the couple went for a drive around the city. After this meeting, a month passed. During this time, Stephen had already bought an apartment and occasionally met Adriana. The girl was angry that the guy came to her so rarely, and he told her in response that he had an emergency at work and had to stay at the bank a lot. Adriana practically did not communicate with her friend. Betty was calm about it and only occasionally made tricky jokes. That Adriana only needed Stephen for a while. Adriana tried not to react to her former friend's words. But one day, when she again heard a rejoinder in her address from Betty, she could not stand it and replied, "You are all angry that the word did not choose you, but that's not my fault. He made his own choice. Why don't you stop bugging me with your sarcastic remarks? You're silly. Pretty soon you'll be crying that you crossed me. Are you saying you'll still claim my boyfriend knowing I'm dating him? You got that right. And if I have to, I'm not going to play hard to get and jump into bed with him," Betty said with a smirk, and immediately went on her way. Adriana stood in a stupor. From this conversation, the girl suddenly realized that Stephen was talking to Betty, since how could the former friend know that she was denying Stephen intimacy? And at the same moment, Adriana decided that she would call her boyfriend right away and offer him to spend the night together. The girl, not thinking long, dialed the guy and said that she wanted to spend the weekend with a sleepover at his place. The man was stunned by this news and instantly agreed. Soon Adriana was making love to Stephen for the first time, and for the morning. When she woke up, she did not regret her decision. She wanted now every morning to wake up in the arms of her favorite man and hear from him pleasant compliments. After that night, the man came to the girl's dormitory more often and took her to his place for sleepovers. Adriana already thought that soon they would become husband and wife, and so she told her lover, "We have been dating for almost 3 months. Maybe we should think about getting married. I don't really need a stamp in my passport. We're good together, and that's what matters. You know, I have a question for you too. Tell me, what are you ready to do for love for me?" The young woman thought for a moment, and then in all seriousness answered that she was ready to sacrifice everything, but only to be near him. In response to this confession, the guy smiled and said that nothing had to be sacrificed, and immediately hugging the girl said, "I just want you to make a tattoo on your shoulder, descending roses. It really turns me on in bed, but it's up to you to decide if you want to do it or not. And if you agree to it, I'll draw the sketch of the flower myself. I'll do it. In the meantime, you draw the flower." The next day, the girl found out how much the procedure cost, and after that she called her mother to ask her for money. Adriana did not hide from her mother what she was asking for, and honestly said that she wanted to get a tattoo. Her mother responded by saying that it was stupid to disfigure her body with Adriana's pictures. When she heard the refusal, she continued to me, "It is very important to do it the way a loved one asked for it. You got a boyfriend, and you never even mentioned him once on the phone. How did you start living in the city? Did you become secretive? I'm sorry, but I wasn't ready to tell you about my relationship with this man. Now I'm sure of our feelings for each other. I'll tell you all about Stephen. But now you tell me, will you give me the money or not?" The mother said yes to her daughter. And on the same day, Adriana received a transfer from her parents. After a while, the girl visited a salon and made a tattoo on her right shoulder. She proudly showed the picture on her body to her lover. Stephen enthusiastically appreciated the tattoo and told the girl the cherished words that Adriana was dear to him. A month flew by when Adriana, having got up in the morning, felt indisposed. The girl felt nauseous and had a general feeling of weakness. Adriana barely sat through her classes that day, hurrying to the dormitory to lie down. She hoped that she would feel better the next day. However, it didn't happen. Adriana felt an uneasy feeling in her soul, and then it hit her. What if she was pregnant? After her college class, Adriana stopped by the drugstore and bought a test. When she got to her dorm, she went straight to the restroom where she did the procedure as instructed. And then the girl watched with excitement as 2 blue stripes appeared on the litmus paper. Adriana was unspeakably happy about it. After all, now she was carrying a baby from her favorite person under her heart. And this meant that soon Adriana will become the legal spouse of the chosen one. The young woman immediately called her lover and said that she wanted to see him immediately. The man promised the girl that as soon as he was free, he would come. Adriana waited with excitement for the chosen one to tell the glad tidings, and as soon as she saw Stephen, immediately hugged him and in his ear whispered the news about the baby. The man pulled away from the embrace and looked at the girl unhappily. Then he asked what Adriana was going to do about it. The young woman looked at the boy perplexed and said firmly that she was going to give birth. Stephen was a little down after the words of the girl, which did not escape Adriana's attention. And she asked him a question. "Are you not happy about it?" "I don't know how to answer that. It's just that the news was unexpected, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Since you decided to have a baby, we probably need to legalize the relationship so that the baby is born in a complete family, where there is a mom and dad. These are exactly the words I've been waiting to hear from you when you need to introduce me to your mom. And then I'm gonna call my parents and invite them over. And they're gonna rent an apartment here for a couple days. You and I need to get married as soon as possible, before I get a belly." Soon Stephen introduced Adriana to his mother Kathy. Adriana tried to be friendly with her future relative, but she intuitively sensed that the woman didn't like her. Adriana thought to herself that Adriana's mother was probably just not ready for her son to remarry and was therefore a little belligerent toward her. Meanwhile, Kathy began to ask the young couple when they were going to get married. Stephen replied that initially they would wait for Adriana's parents and then they would apply at once. The landlady nodded in response and immediately said, "Son, I won't discourage you from taking this step, but I think you're rushing the wedding. You don't know each other well enough to be a family. But if you've made this decision, I insist that there be no wedding. I just want you to get married without the formal part. Your father and I already spent a lot of money on your first wedding. I wasn't planning on having a big party. I was just going to get married and sit with my relatives in a cafe. And we're in a hurry to apply to the registry office for one reason only. Adriana is expecting a baby. You have a rare young person, as I see," Stephen's mother said coldly and looked at her future daughter-in-law with a piercing look. As soon as Adriana and her chosen one went outside from Kathy, the young woman told the man with annoyance that she would like to have a wedding, not a party. The young woman added that she was getting married for the first time and would like to be in a white dress on that day. Stephen replied that it was only a waste of finances to play a wedding now. The young woman tried to object to the young man, but he interrupted her and said, "You know very well that I have recently purchased real estate. I had savings, but not enough to buy an apartment, so I had to take out a loan from the bank. Now you think about it. How much money are we going to use for the party? Or maybe your parents will give us money to throw a wedding. No, they can't help us because they don't make much money. Then we'll never speak of it again. Soon Adriana called her parents and invited them to come to meet her fiancé. Only the girl's mother came. The woman blessed her daughter and promised that she and her father would already come to the marriage ceremony. Adriana was happy that now her mother is familiar with her favorite person. After a while, the young people filed an application in the registry office. Then the newlyweds celebrated the marriage ceremony in one cozy cafe, where only the closest relatives were present. After Adriana became the legal spouse of Stephen, then she moved to live in her husband's apartment. Time slowly went on. The first half of the pregnancy, the young woman felt good. But when the second trimester began, then the doctor said that she needed to lie in the hospital for preservation. And as a result, Adriana was often in the hospital almost until the birth. The young woman gave birth prematurely, a baby girl, which she and her husband named Christina. While in the hospital, Adriana learned that her daughter had kidney disease. The young woman was very worried about this and asked Our Lady only for the health of her little girl. In connection with the girl's illness, Adriana stayed in the hospital for a long time, and after discharge, the attending doctor immediately said that now it was necessary to carefully monitor her daughter's condition and to act precisely according to the instructions of the medical staff. The young woman, as soon as she found herself at home, realized that she was not ready to cope with maternal duties alone. Adriana approached her husband and asked him to talk to her mom about staying with them for a while. Stephen, after listening to the request, responded by telling Adriana to call on her own. She was offended by her husband's words and told him, "You must be forgetting that Christina is your daughter. You see that the baby cries a lot. And I, because I became a mom for the first time, do not know how to act in this or that situation. You yourself wanted this baby, so you should be ready for all the surprises. There are internet forums and literature. Here, sit and learn how to babysit a baby. And after all, you have your own mother to turn to. But my mom works, and your mom is retired. Okay, I'll talk to my mother-in-law myself." Hiding irritation, said the girl. And in a few minutes, Adriana dialed Kathy's number. As soon as she picked up the phone, the daughter-in-law asked her to come to visit. The pensioner asked what was the purpose. Adriana almost responded by cursing her mother-in-law, but then she pulled herself together and politely said, "Just to check on your granddaughter. And in fact, I would like with you in confidence you can come tomorrow." "I will try," said the interlocutor, and immediately disconnected the connection. Adriana waited all the next day, but her mother-in-law didn't show up. Kathy came only 2 days later. She entered the apartment and glanced at her granddaughter and asked her what her daughter-in-law wanted from her. Adriana did not go around. Yes, she told her that she needed help. She explained that she could not cope with the duck, as the child only in her arms behaves calmly, and she has to do laundry, ironing, and cooking at home. Adriana asked her mother-in-law to come to them at least 3 times a week for 3 hours. Kathy didn't say a word. She listened and then said thoughtfully that she never thought her son would marry a country bumpkin who couldn't be a mother and a good housewife. Adriana felt anger boiling up inside her after her mother-in-law's words. But mentally she forced herself to calm down and said aloud, "I realize you don't like me, but your son made a choice and fell in love with me. And we live together. Soulmate. And I brought you here to ask for help, not to discuss me. Stephen and I are raising your granddaughter. You know, your granddaughter, not some stranger's girl. And that's the only reason I'm asking for your help. I don't need to make any pretty speeches right now. I'm a mother too, and I raised my son without any help from my family. I think you are just lazy as you don't have time to do everything when the baby is sleeping. Your son was not born sick like Stephen and I were, and you didn't have to give medications on a strict schedule. That's one thing. And secondly, our daughter sleeps restlessly, If she lies in the crib, any rustle, and the baby wakes up, and Christina sleeps serenely only when she is in my arms. And so I just do not have enough time for household chores, as I am always with my daughter in my arms. You don't have to beg me with tears. I can come over twice a week for a couple hours. Now I have to go." Adriana saw her mother-in-law off and breathed a sigh of relief. She was even glad that the old woman would come twice a week, and as soon as her husband arrived, Adriana informed him that she had spoken to his mother and they had agreed. Stephen nodded in agreement. It had been a month since Kathy had visited Adriana. And then the elderly woman told her sister-in-law that she was leaving for the sanatorium, so she would not come the day after tomorrow. Adriana looked at her mother-in-law in astonishment and was surprised, as there had been no talk about the sanatorium before. Adriana decided not to focus on it and tried to distract herself from these thoughts. A few days passed, and Adriana went out for a walk with her daughter. She wanted a stroller and quietly wrote her daughter. As suddenly Stop Digging, the young woman saw her mother-in-law, who was getting out of her car. Kathy did not see her daughter-in-law. She was in a hurry to go to a fashion boutique. Meanwhile, Adriana could not get away from the fact that she had just seen a relative who was supposed to be in a sanatorium. Adriana came home after the walk in a bad mood. She wanted to tell her husband that her mother was a two-faced person, but she could not say anything because her daughter suddenly began to cry. And when Adriana touched the baby's forehead, she realized that the child had a fever. The woman called an ambulance, and she and Christina were hospitalized. As it turned out, subsequently the girl's kidneys made themselves known. Adriana spent a long time with her daughter in the hospital. After discharge, expensive medications were required. The man was angry that so much money was spent on pills and injections. Adriana saw that all this unnerved her loved one and calmed him as much as she could, saying that Christina would soon get better. However, 6 months later, the girl became ill again, and once again Adriana and her daughter went to the hospital. Stephen this time very rarely visited his wife and child. He told his wife that he had a lot of work at the bank. Adriana only sighed bitterly in response. After a while, the young woman and her daughter were discharged. The doctor immediately informed Adriana that surgery would likely be required if a recurrence occurred. Adriana replied that if it had to be done, she and her husband were ready. Time moved on, and Christina had already turned 1.5 years old, and the young woman already thought that the girl's disease had receded forever. But her expectations were not justified, as her daughter became ill again. And here is another hospitalization. This time Adriana already knew that there would be an operation and was ready for it. Soon the girl was operated. The doctor immediately informed the mother that now it will be necessary to go through a long rehabilitation period. The medic, after the discharge of the child, gave the woman a full list of instructions, how the daughter should be cared for. Adriana with Christina returned home. The girl was glad that now the hospital walls are behind her. She really hoped that her daughter would recover completely. And when she and Christina were taken from the hospital by her husband, she said so. Stephen only gave her husband a sullen look after these words. Life went on from there. Adriana tried to be a model wife and always welcomed her husband home from work. However, Adriana began to notice that lately her husband was often late at the bank, and it was also suspicious that Stephen, who was not a fan of nightclubs, suddenly became a regular. The woman tried to talk to her husband on the subject, but he replied, as soon as the conversation on the subject came up, that this way he relieves stress after work. And lately Adriana has noticed another oddity in the behavior of her spouse. When her husband gets a phone call, he often goes out to talk on the stairwell. Woman, it seems suspicious. And when once again Stephen called and he went out, she quietly followed her chosen one. Adriana looked through the peephole and saw that her lover was standing with his back to her and talking to someone. Adriana opened the door a little and listened. Immediately, she heard her husband saying, "Shalva is not mine. I miss you too." As soon as Adriana heard this phrase, she was like an electric shock. She jerked the door open and looked angrily at her spouse. The man turned around and immediately assessed the situation. Stephen asked his spouse to come into the apartment and not to make a fight here. Adriana forced herself to do it, and as soon as her husband followed her into the hallway, she turned to him and wanted to slap him. But Stephen managed to intercept her hand, saying, "You're behaving like a countrywoman. Didn't you realize earlier that I had a woman on the side? We're civilized people and have a right to privacy. Are you saying that I can have a lover and go to him and have a good night out? You can't, as you're the one who has to keep the family home safe. And I, for your information, am the only one who brings money into our budget. And you're giving me a hard time about it. As soon as Christina turns 3, I'm going to go to work. It's only a couple months away. Don't talk nonsense. Where are you going to work if you haven't finished college? How about selling vegetables at the market? I won't let that happen. I don't need someone pointing a finger at me and telling me that a respectable banker's wife is a slave trader. I don't understand you, but you accused me of cheating. What's the big deal? I was expecting you to have the city permit. I support you and your daughter. I don't have to take your pathetic allowance into account because it's only enough for your medication. I don't beat you like other husbands do and keep you up all night. What else do you want? But you have a mistress. And for your information, I don't want to share you with any woman. If you don't hear me now, I will." With tears shouted the young woman and rushed to the kitchen, and after a few minutes returned back, presenting a knife to her wrist. Adriana did not say anything at that moment, but only looked at her husband, who realized from the look on his wife's face that she would do what she had planned. Stephen smiled gently at his wife and asked her to put down the cold weapon. And then the head of the family said that at this time they had overreacted. It is necessary to calm down and talk. The man, after these words, approached his wife and took the knife from her hands. Then he hugged her bare shoulder and gently kissed her where the tattoo was. The woman cried and snuggled into her husband's chest. Stephen stroked his wife's hair and asked her to stop shedding tears. Suddenly, the landlord lifted the face of the chosen one and said that he had an idea. Adriana, with tears in her eyes, she asked, "What do you want to propose?" "You should go to the village to your parents. You and Christina at least a little air and not be gassed by the air. It would do our daughter good. Especially you said yourself that soon we'll register for kindergarten, and she needs to gain strength before that. And where to do that? Not in the country. I'll think of something about your labor activity." Adriana listened to her husband's proposal in suspense and then exclaimed with indignation that Stephen had chosen her on purpose. She lived in the village so that she could have fun with other women. As if the man was ready for these words, so he hugged his wife again and gently in her ear said, "Do not talk nonsense. I'll even stay with you in the village for a few days. You and I are radically changing our lives for the better. I will not have any more trips to the side." "Did you mean it just now?" "Of course I mean it. Go ahead, call your mother and tell her you're coming soon. I'll take a few days off work tomorrow." Soon Adriana and her husband and daughter were in the village. Stephen stayed with his mother-in-law for 3 days and then returned to the city. When leaving, the man told his spouse that he would call every day. Adriana anxiously accompanied her beloved home. She was afraid that he would start seeing his mistress again. However, Stephen, as promised, called his wife every day and asked how she and her daughter spent their time. A month and a half had passed since Adriana had been living in the village with her daughter. The young woman missed her husband very much, and so, when he called and said that he was going home, Stephen did not particularly welcome his wife's decision, said that it would be possible to stay in the village longer, but Adriana refused and resolutely said, "If you do not come for us, in 2 days we will go ourselves with Christina." "No need, I will take you," replied the head of the family. 2 months had passed since Adriana had returned with her daughter from the village. During this time, they celebrated her birthday. Christina enrolled the girl in kindergarten. Stephen continued to work at the bank, and Adriana took care of household chores. Soon the young woman was bored with everyday life, and she turned to her husband. "You promised me a job. Isn't it time to do it? Is it bad for you to stay at home? I'm bored. I feel like a dependent." "Okay, I'll look into it one of these days." Adriana, after her husband's answer, hugged him and rejoiced in her heart. The woman piously believed that now there was a white streak in their family, and there would be no more sorrow. However, she was mistaken, because 2 weeks after this conversation, her daughter fell ill, and the girl was taken straight from kindergarten to the hospital. Christina's right kidney, Adriana, fell ill. After learning all the details from the doctor, she couldn't believe that her girl was back in the hospital bed. The woman questioned the doctor. How is this possible? After all, Christina had undergone surgery on this organ. The doctor answered the girl's mother using medical terms, and Adriana understood almost nothing from the words of the doctor. The woman was worried about her daughter's condition, and it was doubly hard for her when she visited Christina and the girl asked not to leave her alone. Adriana tried to explain to the child that the doctor wanted to help her, but could do it only in the hospital. The daughter, though, listened to her mother's words, but still asked her mother to stay with her again. The young woman realized that it was simply impossible to explain to her 3-year-old daughter to stay in the hospital. And once again, when Adriana came to visit Christina, the girl whimpered and began to ask to go home. The young woman, as before, began to soothe the child. She herself could hardly hold back her tears. This dialogue was observed by the post-nurse, who approached Adriana and said, "I understand you very well, how hard it is for you. I can only help in one way. When there will be my night shift, I will allow you to sleep with the girl in the room. I'll warn you that you'll have to sleep on a chair or a couch. But I'll do chairs in the hallway or even on the floor. How much do I owe you for this?" The nurse did not answer, but only smiled. Adriana immediately went to her daughter and told her that she would spend the night with her, but not every day. The little girl clapped her hands joyfully. And the mother at that moment thought how little a child needs for joy. Adriana. Now once every 4 days she slept over at her daughter's house. All other days the young woman was also at the hospital with Christina during the day. Adriana gave herself completely to caring for the girl. What was the use of a spouse who had taken a mistress? The woman found out about it by accident. It happened as follows. Adriana, as always, went to a sleepover with her daughter. But it turned out that the nurse was sick and was replaced by another nurse. Adriana tried to persuade the girl in the white coat to let her stay with Christina until morning. But the nurse replied that she had no right to do so and did not want to be reprimanded for making such a decision arbitrarily. Adriana had nothing left to do but to go home. The young woman quietly opened the door to the apartment and heard a woman's laughter. Adriana stopped like a halt. She listened and immediately recognized the guest's voice. It was her former college friend, who said it would be nice to be with you all the time and enjoy making love. "But that's what we do with you," in an excited voice, Stephen replied. Adriana didn't wait for Betty's reply and flashed into the living room where the couple was. Sitting on the couch in an embrace, Adriana threw herself at her rival, intending to claw at her hair. She was not allowed to do this. Spouse, who instantly oriented the man, hugged his beloved, and asked him to calm down. The young woman tried to break free, screaming that she was about to be torn to shreds by this mistress. Then Stephen commanded Betty, "Pack up and leave. We'll take care of this ourselves." The guest, smiling wryly, got up from the couch and sent a kiss to her former friend and went into the hallway. A few minutes later, the couple only heard the front door slam. Only after that, Stephen let go of his wife, who looked at him angrily. Adriana only wanted to shout hurtful phrases to her husband, but he beat her to it. "Pull yourself together. What did you want? You're always ending up in hospitals. You don't care about me. And I, too, need care and a woman's affection." That's what I found with Betty. So while I take care of my sick daughter and have fun, so like she's begging you for expensive medication, and you can afford champagne, which costs a lot of money. How am I supposed to understand you? I give all of myself only to you and my daughter, and you're saving me such a pig. I'm asking you, let's not use big words and mutual insults. It's just that I've already explained to you that I lacked female attention. Now I'll give you a woman's attention in hysterics, said the young woman and rushed to the window, which opened wide. Adriana quickly climbed on the windowsill and fervently said, "If you lack attention, you will have it. I'm about to step off the 3rd floor and you'll be alone with your daughter. That's when you will have attention, because Christina will stay with you and you will have to take care of her. And if you fulfill your fatherly duties well, our daughter will provide you with care in your old age. Then you'll have a woman's attention in your old age. Think of your daughter. Why do you only care about yourself?" The man said, and made a step towards his wife. And at the same moment he heard the exasperated voice of his wife. "Stay away. We need to clarify the relationship once and for all. You have to promise to stop going to women. You know very well that I can do this deed at this moment." The man saw that his wife was in a hysterical state, and Stephen decided that now was not the best occasion to clarify the relationship. So he constantly apologized to his beloved and got down on one knee in front of Adriana, quietly saying, "Come down. I only now realized how much we love each other, and also realized that how much grief I brought you in this life. I'm sorry." Adriana looked incredulously at her lover, who continued to speak beautiful words. The young woman distrustfully stretched out her hands to him, and the man hurriedly removed his wife from the windowsill. He promised that he would have no more liaisons with women on the side. Adriana, hearing Stephen give her his word, immediately cried out, "And you already promised me that. What happened in the end? I find you alone with Betty. I told you it wouldn't happen again. Let's talk about your daughter. Tell me how she's doing." As soon as they talked about the girl, Adriana forgot about what had happened here the other day. The young woman told her that she had not been able to stay with her daughter for the night, and immediately told her that there was good news. Adriana said that Christina would be discharged in 2 days. The man, after his wife's words, hugged her and noted that the latest news is joyful. Soon the girl was discharged. Adriana put her daughter back in daycare and reminded her husband about the conversation about work. A few days passed after Christina was discharged, and Adriana noticed that her spouse was now dropping calls when called, and after a while would lock himself in the bathroom with the phone. Adriana had a woman's intuition that her husband was doing this for a reason. He clearly continues to communicate with Betty even though he doesn't see her, as the chosen one was on time from work. Adriana realized that there was no point in talking to her husband about his communication with his ex-girlfriend, and the girl decided that it was worth talking to her mother-in-law about it. Adriana took her daughter to kindergarten in the morning and immediately went to Stephen's mother. Kathy met her daughter-in-law warily, as the daughter-in-law rarely showed up unannounced. The landlady invited her into the hall and asked what had brought Adriana to visit. The young woman did not go around and around, but said straight away, "Your son is cheating on me. I'd like you to influence Stephen. I've spoken to him several times, but our conversation is going nowhere. Stephen keeps looking at other women. I wonder about that in particular." With a chuckle, Kathy said, and immediately continued, "If my son is not satisfied, how can I influence him? I see only one way out. You need to divorce, and the whole problem will be solved." "What do you mean, divorce? Stephen and I have a child together. Besides, my daughter's not in good health. And on top of all that, I love my husband. Stephen is now in a relationship with an ex-girlfriend of mine. And believe me, she has no interest in your son. Betty is just trying to get back at me because Tegan chose me over her. All I'm asking you to do is talk to your son, because his family is falling apart. I know Stephen listens to your word. Everything you've told me hasn't touched me in the slightest. But for my part, I promise I'll talk to my son. I think this is the end of our conversation, because I have to go to the tourist center. By the way, I wanted to tell you that you should go to the gym too, since you have some extra pounds that don't look good on you." Adriana did not reply to her mother-in-law's barbs. The young woman hurried to leave Kathy's apartment. Adriana thought that a conversation between mother and son would at least change the situation, and perhaps after a dialogue with her mother, her husband would stop communicating with Betty. In the meantime, Kathy, 2 days after the arrival of her daughter-in-law, called her son and asked him to come alone. Stephen complied with his mother's request, and in the evening, having warned his wife that he would be late, went to his mother. And now the man sits opposite his mother in the living room and looks at her questioningly. The elderly woman smiled at her son and asked how his family relations were. Stephen shrugged and mumbled that it wasn't bad. And at the same moment, Kathy sternly mumbled that she would like to know the true answer. And at once added the daughter-in-law, "The other day she complained to me that you were truanting. Tell me, why should I listen to this from the village Lockhorns? I don't know why she came to you. I'm not seeing anyone at the moment, and I'm tired of it all." "Of what exactly?" the landlady asked calmly. "I'm tired of the constant whims of my daughter. I realize that she is sick, but I cannot bear to hear often her crying. I'm sick and tired of my wife constantly controlling my every move. You know very well I like variety, and I've been known to go out on the side. But she knew that when she got married. Now she wants a model family man who admires only her. If things are so bad, why don't you just get a divorce? Make her choose. Either Adriana accepts you for who you are, or you work things out and live each on your own. It's so easy for you to talk about it. I've thought about it before and even said I was entitled to my own space. So she started scaring me about taking her own life," the man said irritably, and rubbed his temples nervously with his palms. "It is possible that your spouse is manipulating you with such actions. They are simple threats to make you live by her rules. Women often use such tricks, but they don't really mean to take their own lives. Mom, did you see her when she grabbed the knife? One more careless word from me and Adriana would have carried out her threat. And to test the fate of a wife who would or would not do such a thing. I have no desire to do so. Imagine her throwing herself out of a window in front of me. How would I live with that for the rest of my life? I'm in a vicious circle and I don't know how to get out of it. I just don't have the energy." "Okay, well, don't lose heart. I'll think about what to do about the situation." After talking to his mother, Stephen went home, where Adriana was waiting for him. The girl immediately, as soon as she saw her husband, asked why he went to Kathy. The head of the family did not talk about the topic of the conversation and lied to the chosen one that his mother asked him to come to fix the plumbing. Adriana immediately hinted that the lover lied, since in such cases the mother-in-law always called the master. They invited her son to help. Several days passed. Adriana still saw that Stephen continued to communicate with the former girlfriend, and she gave him a scandal, reminding him that he would kill himself if he did not stop behaving like that. The man, barely containing his irritation, explained to his wife that Betty herself was calling him and asking to talk to her. Adriana offered to let her talk to Betty herself. Stephen only wanted to answer the chosen one. His mother called and asked him to come over. The head of the family, after a short conversation with his mom, said that yes, they are talking on the subject. As soon as he returns from Kathy, Adriana, before leaving, asked what was the occasion for which his mother called him. At this late hour, the man pronounced that he did not know and would tell her when he returned. Soon Stephen was at his mother's house and told her about the altercation with his wife. The man told it all in an irritated tone. Kathy could see that his son really couldn't bear to live like this. The older woman shook her head and said, "I have an idea. Your wife is afraid of losing you. Perhaps she really loves you with some special love, that she is ready to stop living if you are not around. But you can send your spouse to a remote village where there is no cell phone service for a while, ostensibly to heal the daughter, but only for a long time. And it is quite possible that she will meet a man there with whom she will fall in love. This is not a solution, as I sent her to the village to her parents. She lived there for a month and a half and dreamed, and only about me. With bitterness, replied the son. Wait to immediately cancel this option, which I suggested. First, when Adriana was at her parents', there was a connection, and we called every day, not letting each other forget about themselves. And secondly, she was only away for a month and a half, and in my case, I proposed to take her to the middle of nowhere for 6 months, while inventing a fairy tale for her. The conspirator mumbled Kathy and looked at his son with a testing look. The man hesitated. The landlady did not hurry him. She realized that Stephen had to think things over carefully to make a decision. About 20 minutes passed before Stephen spoke. He said to his mother, "Perhaps there is truth in what you say, and it is worth the risk of doing something like this. But where would I find such a place? And then how can I persuade Adriana to go there? After all, she will think that I live on her right side on purpose, so that I can have fun in my absence. On the subject of persuasion, then here is my motherly advice to you. For a start, become for a time approximately husband, at least for a month. Give Adriana gifts. Pay as much attention to your daughter as you can. You have to put your spouse's attention to sleep so that she believes that there is harmony in the family again. And by no means even socialize with yourselves. Tell them you're in the middle of a divorce so they won't bug you for a while. Now, as to where to find such a place, I think the ideal would be to take your spouse to a remote village where there is no communication, but there is a witch doctor. This way, you'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. On the one hand, maybe this nickname will cure Christina, and on the other hand, you'll probably achieve a painless divorce. And if it doesn't work," barely audible, said Stephen, "then you will live and be happy with your Adriana, whom you chose to marry. You have no other option how to act in this situation. So do it." Stephen thanked his mother for her cooperation and was about to leave. Just then, he remembered that he had promised his wife to tell her why he had called his mother to his house. Kathy laughed and said that her son was still an unreasonable child, although he often changed partners. And then the older woman added that Adriana had to tell part of the truth. The man looked at his mother with incomprehension, who said, "Tell her that you had an explanatory talk with you about the fact that you do not devote enough time to your family, and also scolded you about cheating. Let Adriana think I'm on her side. Now go with God to your beloved." Stephen soon arrived home and was immediately approached by his wife about his trip to his mother. The man told his wife as Kathy had advised, and the head of the household instantly caught the mood of his wife, who was amused. Stephen thought to himself what a wise mother he had. Adriana, in turn, mentally thanked her mother-in-law that she did not stand aside and stood up for her. Time moved forward unhurriedly. Adriana could not enjoy family life. Her husband often began to say compliments to her, tried to help with household chores, often played with his daughter, which was previously very rare. All these changes in the behavior of the spouse caused enthusiastic Adriana, and she decided to thank her mother-in-law for her help. The young woman bought a bouquet of flowers and a small cake. Then she called Mother Stephen and asked permission to come over. Kathy said in a unified voice that it was not necessary to warn her about her visit, and she could come whenever she wanted. And a short time later, Adriana was sitting at her mother-in-law's house, saying thank you to the landlady. The elderly woman listened to her daughter-in-law and realized that her son had done the right thing, as the daughter-in-law believed that her spouse had completely changed. And as soon as Adriana stopped talking, the mother-in-law uttered, "I am glad that you are doing well. Now you and your husband need to work on your daughter's health. Maybe find a healer. A lot of people are turning to them these days. You know, my husband just told me that the day before yesterday. You must have told him that, right?" "Yes," Stephen called and we talked about it. "But you're a mother, and you're the only one who can make that decision. I would do anything for my daughter's health. Thank you again for everything. I can't believe we're having this kind conversation right now." Soon, Adriana returned home. She was anxiously awaiting her husband's return, and as soon as Stephen appeared in the apartment, she told him about her visit to her mother-in-law. The head of the family hugged her husband and said that he had made some inquiries and found a healer who lived in a remote village. Adriana looked at her husband with interest and asked him to tell about this healer. The husband sat down in a chair and said that in one village there lived an old man who helped people, but he had to live with him for a while to get rid of the disease. And the man added that there are rumors about this healer that he cures even hopelessly ill people. The girl, hearing this, smiled happily and told her husband that it was necessary to go to this healer. The husband was satisfied, nodded and replied that tomorrow he would contact this grandfather. A day later, Stephen said that he had to go to the old man's village to make arrangements for the healer to see them. Adriana sadly asked the chosen one whether it was impossible to call this man. The head of the family said that there was no connection where the old man lived. There was nothing left for the girl to do but to accept her husband's decision. It was 3 days before Stephen left for the country, and now he had returned home. The man told his wife that the healer was waiting for them. The woman asked how long she would be in the wilderness. Stephen replied that the healer would give her the exact answer. But the same man warned her that it would be at least 2 months for sure. Adriana became upset after these words. This was noticed by the head of the family and asked why she became sad. The girl replied, "We will be with you in separation, and I will not even hear your voice. Think not about that now, but about the fact that we will cure Christina, and you're gonna hear my voice every day. I'm gonna record your speech for you, but you'll get that tape when you're already living at Grandpa's house." Wow, that's a great idea. Now get your things together. We're gonna have to leave soon. You know, it's a good thing we decided to send you and your daughter to this healer over the summer. A few days later, Adriana, her husband and daughter were on their way by car to the village. The woman dreamed of only one thing: that time would fly by, and she would return home with a healthy daughter, and she and her husband would never be separated for such a long period of time again. And Stephen mentally thanked fate that everything was going so smoothly. Soon the car pulled onto the village roads and raced over the bumps. The man mentally thanked that he had to drive on such a broken road. The wife saw that her husband resented it and tried her best to calm him down. After a while, the car entered a small village. Stephen stopped at an extreme hut and asked his wife to stay in the car. He himself got out of the car. Stephen approached the house where he was chopping wood. There was a man in the yard. Adriana's husband approached the stranger. "Hello, sir. We're looking for Christopher. Where can we find him?" "Strangers. You can tell you've come to see him for treatment, but he's not here. It's Thursday, which is the day he goes into town every 2 weeks to get supplies. Today's the day. Can you tell me where his house is? You can tell he's not from around here. He has an old hut here, but he doesn't live here much. Christopher lives in the woods. He's a woodsman and a wanderer in one. Help me get my wife and child there. Christopher knows we're coming. A friend of mine arranged it, but he forgot to tell me that on Thursdays the healer goes into town. And I'll pay you well for this favor. I just don't have time to wait here for a healer. There's plenty of work to do in town. Well, if you pay me, that's good, but you can't get there by car. It's a boat ride down the river. And believe me, that's a lot of gasoline. And I'll tell you right away, I'm not going to wait there for long. I'll just take you back to the village. I've got a lot to do too. I can see that. I'll pay for the gas too. But please do not say anything unnecessary to my wife for this additional payment." The interlocutor looked at Stephen suspiciously and nodded his head. And then the man told him to wait for a while. In the meantime, Stephen went to the car, took out his things, and asked his spouse to get out of the car, explaining to her that they would now drive the motor. Adriana was surprised and wanted to ask him some questions, but he firmly replied that it was not the time to talk. 15 minutes later, the woman and her child were already getting into the motor. Stephen immediately warned that the wigs would not go as he was seasick. Adriana asked her husband in farewell when he would eat them. The head of the household replied that he would arrive here in a month and live here for a week. This message from her husband cheered up the woman's spirits, and she sent him an air kiss. Soon the motor was pumping away from the shore. The woman clasped her daughter to her side and regarded a glimpse of the scenery. She thought about the fact that she would have to spend so much time without the person she loved. The thought made her sad, but the woman tried to shift her attention to the fact that her daughter's health depended on this trip. How long the boat ride Adriana didn't clock, but she felt that her legs had already clocked up. That's when the woman asked the man how much farther to the destination. The counselor replied that one more turn and they would arrive, and already Adriana and her child had landed on dry land. The man pointed to a tube and said that it was necessary to go up on a hill and there would be a healer's hut. Adriana bewilderedly asked the stranger if he would help her carry her things up to the hut. The man nodded reluctantly, picked up the bag and the child's backpack, and walked down the path. And the woman followed him, leading the child by the hand. As soon as they climbed the hillside, the girl saw an unassuming cabin. Then a sheepdog ran up to them and started barking loudly at her. Adriana was frightened and clung to her daughter, who was already crying with fear. The man softly said flatulence to the dog. "Ugh, don't scare the guests," and after these words turned to his companion. "I will lead you into the house, and you will wait there. I don't have time to stay here. I got a lot to do, and it's a long way home, as you've already noticed. Don't be afraid of the dog. The dog is smart." In a few minutes, the woman and the child were already in the hut. Adriana looked around the house and thought that this was where she would have to spend 2 months, maybe more. The woman was a little stunned. So since she thought she would be living in the village, but it turned out to be in the middle of nowhere. It was already evening when Adriana heard the sound of a motor. She realized that Christopher had arrived. The young woman mentally prepared herself for the meeting with the healer. As soon as the man entered the hut, the girl immediately said hello. The grandfather looked at the guest and not friendly asked what she was doing here. Adriana was confused by this question and inarticulately said that there was an agreement about her arrival. Christopher lit a makeshift lamp, illuminated the woman's face, and then said sternly, "And with whom I wondered that I will have a young person, and even with a child. You are doctors, the hotel, and my husband recently came to you to help us cure our daughter. He said he'd have to stay here for a while, and that's the instruction you gave him. That's the most heresy I've ever heard in my life. All right, I can see the raid already. You're not getting out of the house. You're gonna be here till morning. And then you're gonna show me all of your daughter's medical records. I'll see if there's anything I can do to help, and then we'll decide what to do with you. One more thing, nobody made any arrangements with me about you. Now I'll quickly prepare dinner, then we'll put the baby to bed, and you'll tell me everything in detail. But maybe my friend made arrangements with you through an acquaintance, not directly." With tears in her eyes, said the woman, "I have already explained to you that I did not have such a conversation on this topic. Let's understand everything a little later." After these words, the man began to sort out the products that he brought from the city. And then he made a small fire outside, where he piled sausages and potatoes on a frying pan. And after that, Christopher invited the woman and her daughter to have dinner. Soon Christina was put to bed, and the elderly man asked to tell how the woman found herself here. He listened to the guest's story and began to clarify what Stephen had said about him. Then he asked the grandfather a few questions that interested him. "Tell me, my dear, if your husband had made an arrangement with me about you, why did I not meet you then? And also, why didn't your husband himself bring you here and wait for me? I don't know. Perhaps you had urgent business and had to leave, and he didn't come here because he's been seasick since childhood. Don't you find your own answers funny? What do you want me to say? I don't understand what's going on." Crying bitterly, the young woman said, "Calm down." The grandfather whispered further, so that Adriana would not hear. "But it seems to me that I understand everything." The next morning, the old man got up very early. He went to the lake, which was not far from the hut. The grandfather caught fish and boiled some soup, and then went to wake up the woman and the child. Christopher entered the house in a cheerful voice and said that it was time to get up and have breakfast. Adriana did not immediately realize when she woke up. Where was she? The woman looked around confused and immediately remembered yesterday. Adriana wished the healer a good morning and hurried to her daughter, who had already opened her eyes. The elderly man offered to wash her face, guessed from standing water in a bucket, and invited to breakfast. As soon as everyone had eaten, the forester asked for medical documents. He studied them for a long time and then said that there was hope for recovery, but the treatment needed to be done in stages. Adriana looked fearfully at Christopher and told him how long it would take. The interlocutor, smiling, replied that it would take at least 6 months. The woman shrieked and said, "We can't stay in this wilderness without civilization for so long. There are no necessary conditions for a small child to live here, and I am not forcing you to live here. You have to make your own decision. Do you want your daughter to get well or not? That's up to you. I can tell you this about the conditions. During the war, people lived in worse conditions, and mothers would do anything to cure their children. But I have a husband who will worry about me." With tears in her eyes, said the woman. Husband said, "Come on, tell me about your life with him, while I prepare a potion of herbs. For your daughter, only one agreement, that you tell the truth and without any exaggerations." The woman lowered her head and began her story in a quiet voice. The man, meanwhile, was pulling out various pouches from the right basket, which he spread out on a makeshift section on the board. From the outside, it might have seemed that the healer was only busy with his work, but it was not so. Christopher listened attentively to the girl, and as soon as she was silent, said, "You know what I'll tell you, dearie. It will sound harsh, but it's true. Your whole life with this Stephen is a misunderstanding. And believe me, you're only here because your husband didn't know how to get rid of you. So when he found out I was helping people, he decided to keep you here. I can even say that your husband is not a stupid man, because he chose a village where there is no communication, so that in the near future you could not contact him. I don't believe that. Stephen and I have an excellent relationship lately. I've even made contact with my mother-in-law, even though I thought it would be impossible." She exclaimed in a passionate tone, "Maybe it can't, and your mother-in-law just has a cunning mind. Well, I will not argue with you. I can offer you only one option to live here for a month. I'll be tutoring your daughter during that time. And you wait for your husband, who said he'd visit you. Then we'll see which one of us was right in our speculation. It's up to you. You tell me to take you now. I'll do it, no problem." The woman thought for a moment, and then realized that there was some truth in Christopher's words. She agreed to the older man's proposal and immediately asked what she had to do. The man laughed in response and said that the only thing she would be required to do was to cook, and if there is a desire, then watch over the vegetable garden. The girl looked at the forester in amazement and asked a question, "Do you have a vegetable garden here?" "Of course. I live here almost all the time. I only go to the village on Saturday with an overnight stay to receive the sick who occasionally come there. Now I'm going, and I'll show you my grounds." It had been a week since Adriana and her daughter, living in the forest wilderness. The woman tried not to think that her husband could have acted in the way the witch doctor had written. She thought there had been a misunderstanding. It even occurred to her that her husband had simply mistaken the healer and brought her to the wrong person. Adriana waited until a month had passed, and she had traveled to the village to see her husband. The week before she met Stephen, her grandfather did not arrive from the village alone. Adriana and Christina watched Christopher walk out onto dry land. In doing so, he pulled the goat behind him on a rope. This scene made the girl and the woman laugh. They watched as the old man tried to pull the animal onto dry land. It turned out, while doing so, it bumps and vomits loudly. As soon as the elderly man managed to do it, then he lowered himself to the ground and panting, said, "And I thought that the most stubborn animal is a donkey. Turns out I was wrong. This goat," Adriana asked curiously, "why climb into this animal?" The old man grinned and answered that he had long dreamed of a goat because the steamy milk is good for people at his age. And then the man added that Christina also needed to consume this product. Adriana marveled at the words of the healer because he had never brought a goat before. And as soon as the girl appeared, he immediately bought the animal and brought it here. A few weeks passed as the woman lived with Christopher. During this time, she learned how to fish, how to milk the goat. The elderly man himself prepared herbal collections that he gave to the girl from day to day. It was exactly 1 month after Adriana separated from her husband, and the woman started talking in the morning about going to the village. The forester did not interrupt and suggested that they set off immediately. Soon Adriana and her daughter and grandfather were already in the village. They came to the only road that went from the town to the village and sat down on a fallen tree. Adriana often climbed up to see her spouse's familiar automobile, but it was still gone. Hour after hour passed. There was already a bus that came here once a day, but there was no Stephen there either. The woman looked dejectedly at the road and intuitively realized that she would not see her husband today. Adriana turned to Christopher. Perhaps my husband had arrived earlier when we were on the road. He must have waited for us, and without waiting, left. I don't know what to do now. If you want to spend the night here in my house, I'll take you back to town tomorrow. But my daughter still has to drink your potion for a month. Maybe in a month we'll sail early to the village, and I'll meet my husband. I'm not sure, she suggested. Have it your way. And now it's time to go to our lair to make it before dark. Time moved on, and another month of Adriana's life in this godforsaken place was approaching. A few days before going to the village, the woman had asked an elderly man why he was dwelling. Here an old man sighed sorrowfully and pronounced that it was a long story. Adriana touched the woodsman's arm and said that she had plenty of time. She asked him to tell her about his life. Christopher made himself comfortable on her and began his story. Christopher was born in a family where his parents worked as doctors, and when he grew up, he also chose the specialty of medicine. But only the young man decided to become a paramedic. He was invited that he would rush in an ambulance to save someone's life. And in a short time, Christopher graduated from the educational institution and got a job. The young man worked a year in an ambulance, and then he got a call. He went to the exit of the patient was a 19-year-old girl, Clara, who had a heart condition. She was rushed to the hospital. As the girl was being wheeled on a gurney to the hospital, Christopher suddenly shook her hand and told her that she would be fine. After this call, several days passed, and the young man could not forget the eyes of that girl, and he decided to visit her. The man easily recognized the ward where the patient was lying, and soon stood near the girl's hospital bed with a bag of fruit and a bouquet of flowers. Clara immediately recognized the paramedic and asked him, "What are you doing here?" "I decided to visit the pretty maiden." "Don't say flattering words that you don't believe yourself. In my orphanage, they used to call a lock a lid to my face. They're stupid people who didn't see your beauty." And then Christopher, with the girl's permission, sat down next to her, and they began to talk. Initially, the young man told about himself, and then asked the new acquaintance about her life. She was embarrassed and said that she did not have much information to tell about herself. But Christopher insisted on his own, and the girl said that she did not know her parents, as her mother abandoned her in the maternity hospital. After that, she went to an orphanage, where she spent her childhood and adolescence. And after the state allocated her a one-room apartment, and she then went to medical school. After this visit, Christopher more than once came to the girl, and when she was discharged, he himself took from the hospital. From that time, the young people began to meet a month after meeting. The guy confessed his love and offered his hand and heart. The girl responded with consent, and as soon as the man heard the word beloved, he said, "You are my marriage cap for life, and I won't give you to anyone. But there is one thing. I know that you work part-time as a nurse at night. Well, you're quitting tomorrow. That kind of work is not good for you. You study in the morning and work at night. What do you say, future husband?" Soon the couple applied, and then had a modest wedding. Christopher moved to live with his wife, and the young people began to master family life. At first it was not easy, as there was often not enough money, but the newlyweds tried not to fight about it. And strangely enough, they succeeded. After a while, she graduated from college and got a job as a nurse, and at the same time, Christopher expressed a desire to become a doctor of homeopathy. He entered the institute by correspondence, and after some time acquired a profession, on which he began his labor activity. And at the same moment, he learned that his wife was in a position. For the couple, it was a joyful event. They were already dreaming of a baby. After a while, Slaga gave birth to a healthy baby boy, who was named John. The son grew up a healthy boy to the joy of his parents. When John was 3 years old, he was enrolled in kindergarten. Christopher thought that he was the happiest person because he had a woman he loved and a son he loved, as well as a job that gave him pleasure. As the years went by, when John turned 14 years old, his grandparents passed away suddenly within a year. Christopher then moved with his family to live in his father's apartment. It was decided to rent out the one-room apartment and save the money for a summer house. Some more time passed, and John graduated from school with a silver medal and then entered medical school. The parents of the young man were happy for their son and dreamed that he would become a highly qualified specialist in the future. However, the happiness of the family broke overnight. John began to feel ill when John was studying in the 3rd year. The woman was examined and a brain tumor was added to the heart disease. Christopher, as if was crushed by this diagnosis, but the man in no way showed it to his spouse. Soon she was put in the hospital. She lay there for some time, but the attending physician said that it was better to take the woman to a Moscow clinic. Christopher, having collected his savings, immediately went to the capital. The woman underwent many necessary procedures. A lot of money was spent, but nothing helped. She was getting worse day by day. The son demanded that his father take his mother abroad, and Christopher was already ready for this. He sold his car, as well as the dacha, which had recently been purchased, and was preparing for the trip. As he was approached by his wife, who said, "Don't go abroad. I will not survive this trip. You are a medical professional yourself, and you understand everything. I don't have much time left. It is better to leave these finances, son, and do not get angry at him that he insists on traveling abroad. He's still a young and hot guy. As they say, life doesn't burn him. Don't talk nonsense. We'll get you back on your feet," the man said firmly. "Don't talk about it. Try your own strength to cure me. They say love heals. Maybe you can do it. I just want to spend my last days with you and know that my 2 favorite men are doing well." Christopher looked at the woman he loved and tears involuntarily ran down his eyes, which he could not stop. He realized that she was telling the truth about the fact that his wife had only a few days to live, but it hurt him that his beloved knew about it. After all, she's a doctor. And Clara, seeing the tears of her husband, quietly said, "Do not mourn for me if I go to the next world, then with a peaceful soul, because we lived a life worthy. You better buy a house somewhere and let me spend the rest of my days there, where you will feed me with healing creatures." "All right, my love, I will." Christopher told his son of his decision. John, when he found out that his father was going to go to the backwoods instead of abroad, was furious. They had a big fight between them, and in the meantime, Christopher quit his job, and he was already the head of the hospital there. And then he found a small village where he bought a small house and moved there with his wife. The woman lived in the village for a little over 6 months. Christopher prepared a potion for his wife, but realized that it was all useless. And often at night, when the chosen one fell asleep restless son, he went out into the yard and quietly whimpered because he could not change the situation. Died in the early morning, but before that the woman managed to say that she loved her son and Christopher very much, and also asked her husband to bury her in this area. She said it was beautiful and easy to breathe. After these words, she took a deep breath and fell asleep forever. Christopher fulfilled his wife's request and stayed here for good. He did not want to leave his native and beloved man alone after 2 years, as he did not become a wife. A man in the city learned the courses of a forester and got a job in the forestry, having moved into the wilderness. After this story, Christopher looked at Adriana, who was sitting, breathless, and tears were streaming down her face. It was as if the young woman could feel how this older man had gone to any lengths to be with his beloved forever. The forester touched Adriana's arm and looked at her carefully. The girl did not know what to say to this man, nor could she, since there was a lump in her throat. Christopher patted Adriana's hand and said that the time was late and it was time to go to bed. A few days passed, and Adriana and her grandfather and Christina went to the village again. The woman did not really hope to see her husband again. She didn't understand why she felt this way. The forester's story kept replaying in her mind, and Adriana involuntarily thought that it was Christopher's story that prevented her from believing that her husband would appear before she got into the motor. The girl suddenly inquired of the elderly man, "Does the son know that it was Clara who wished to settle in the village?" The grandfather looked sadly at Adriana and shook his head negatively. And then he heard another question from the woman he was talking to. "How often do you see John? We parted in an uneasy relationship. I've lived here for almost 12 years now. And in that time, John has been twice. Every 4th year he comes for 3 days. My son told me himself that he would come every 4 years. Why that number, I don't know. He's supposed to come next summer." Soon the man, woman, and child were already in the village and sitting in the tree again. Adriana did not jump up to see if a car was coming along the road. Then a man passed by them who was taking Adriana and her daughter to the place where the healer lived. The girl told this to Christopher, who immediately stopped the fellow villager and said, "Do you not remember? Prokopovich took this person with a child to me a couple of months ago." "I remember, of course." "What happened? Tell me how he acted. I can voice it in front of the young lady." "You're not sure?" asked Lawson. "You can, and you should," Adriana said boldly. "He was a strange guy. He paid double cab fare and told me not to say anything to his wife. I thought he was coming with us to take his wife to her destination. He's got some kind of seasickness thing going on. Any reasonable man wouldn't let a beautiful woman go alone with a stranger." "You see what he did," Lawson said. Christopher looked at Adriana, who smiled sadly, and then said that it was time to go back to the goat. And then she added that it was very difficult to milk in the dark. The woman took her daughter by the hand and went first to the river. As soon as they reached the motor, the forester turned Adriana to face him and said, "I understand that you have made conclusions for yourself. What are you going to do?" "Treat my daughter further. You said that 2 months to drink from Varia, and then a month of rest. That's 2 months gone. Now we'll take an active vacation." Trying not to cry, mumbled a young woman. "Do you mean that you are ready to live here for a few more months?" "Of course I am. It's all for my daughter's health. You don't understand. As in your life story. I've had my whole soul ripped out of me. I would have done anything to live with Stephen. I couldn't imagine living without him. And I realize now that he doesn't need me or my daughter. After all, a loving man would have wanted to know how his wife and daughter were living all this time. And here is silence. You left everything for your beloved and came here. You had a prestigious position in the city, surely a good position in society, and you even the desire of the woman you love went to conflict with his own son. And I have nothing to expect from Stephen, since I'm nothing to him. I'm sure this man is now tumbling around with my ex-girlfriend, and he's free to keep it that way. What's important to me right now is to cure Christina, and then we'll see how I move on. You need to think about your decision with a clear head. And they're emotional right now. Now let's go home. It is really uncomfortable to milk in the dark," the old man said in reply. The next morning, Adriana was the first to get up. She went out of the hut and looked at the nature. She liked to contemplate the forest and breathe in the fresh air. And at that time, Christopher approached her quietly and asked her how she had slept last night. The girl turned to the older man and answered that she had slept better than ever. And then the forester asked, "Now you must decide for sure whether you will stay here or be taken to town. You need to know that now, because very soon summer will be over and fall will come. It can be hard to get out of here. It's often hard to get out here. It rains so hard that the river overflows its banks, and in winter there is a blizzard that you don't want to show your nose from your hut. I told you yesterday I'm staying. You taught me how to fish, and now it's time for me to learn how to hunt. Although I guess it's not really my thing. If you've made up your mind, you're a good girl. Now it's just a matter of building a barn for the goat, making hay, and of course, buying you appropriate clothing for the season. There's something for you in my lake car stuff, if you're not squeamish, of course. Christina, on the other hand, will have to buy everything new. Of course, I won't be squeamish. What are you talking about? You know, I feel bad. I don't even have the money to pay for it. Oh, wait a minute. Here's the engagement ring and the gold earrings Stephen gave me. You could pawn all that jewelry and you'd have money. Stop talking nonsense. I have the means. How much do I need on my own? I haven't spent much over the years. I wanted to give it to my son. I gave it to him, and he gave it back to me. So save your gold for a rainy day. Next Thursday, we'll go into town, do a little shopping. We'll get Christina a doll and buy her some books. And I made the Barbie nursery myself. It won't be worse than the store ones. Time flew by. Autumn passed, and then winter came. Adriana enjoyed watching the seasons change, and in each month she found its own charm. What did the latter man often talk about? The elderly man listened to her interlocutor and told her that she had a talent for writing. Because of the way she painted colorfully the seasons, soon it was spring. The man started the vegetable garden. Adriana was helping him with it. Christina also demanded that the adults give her a job. Christopher, in order not to offend the child, gave the girl millet and asked her to pick it. Initially, Christina did it with passion, but soon she got bored with it and demanded a shovel. This statement puzzled the forester, and he promised the child that as soon as Thursday came, he would buy her a children's set of vegetable gardeners and set aside a special place for planting. Spring flew by and summer came. The young woman already realized that it was impossible to stay here forever. In just a couple of years, Christina would have to go to school. Adriana knew that Christopher was thinking about it, too, who had already gotten used to having Adriana and the little girl, whom he loved as his own granddaughter, living next to him. So Adriana decided that it was time to talk to the forester about her return to town. She was going to do it in the morning, but as soon as she got up, she saw that the old man was going shopping. And she damned their news to herself, since she had completely forgotten that it was Thursday and her grandfather was going to town. The elderly man asked what to buy, and the girl quickly wrote a list of groceries, which she held out to Christopher. Soon the forester sailed off to the motor. The woman decided to clean up the hut, the more so her daughter was busy drawing. The girl collected half and raised the floors, then washed everywhere and looked over her work. After that, Adriana began to prepare the first course. She habitually made a fire and put water on the fire in the column. Somehow she heard the roar of a motor. The girl thought that another fisherman went fishing. However, the motor swam to the shore and a middle-aged man came out of it. The stranger looked at the young woman with surprise and asked what she was doing here. Adriana was outraged by this question. And Adriana said, "You are the one who owes me an explanation as to why you came here." "Good acquaintance. Well, I'll start by explaining. I'm here to visit Christopher's father." The young woman stared at the forester's son with all her eyes and then splayed her hands and said loudly, "So you are John," and immediately added sternly, "Good son. He doesn't know what's wrong with his father. And he comes once every 4 years. Wow, I'm getting hit on by a wood nymph. This is a very interesting situation," the man said with a chuckle. "I won't stop you from having fun. Tell the father that his son came, and he opened. John stopped talking as he saw Christina come out of the house. The man was silent for a while, but then he said, "And this is my father, who pretends to be a devoted husband to my mother, when he has already made a child." After these words, John turned around and went to the motor. And immediately afterwards I heard, "Such asses as you, it is necessary to search for more. Your father is a golden man who still loves Clara. That's the only reason he lives here and doesn't move to the city. And you should be ashamed of yourself for thinking so badly of your own father." "What did you say? You don't know anything. Dad brought Mom here when the doctors could have helped her." And the man was interrupted at the same moment by Adriana, who said in a calmer voice, "Shut up, ignoramus, and listen to what I'm about to tell you. Your mother knew she was going to die soon, and it was she who persuaded your father to bring her here. I don't know why I kept it from you, Christopher, but I can tell you with certainty that I have never seen such love as that between your parents." And then the young woman was already telling about herself, how the couple got here after they learned about each other and remembered their acquaintance and laughed. And then the girl asked what John hadn't said when she interrupted him. The man smiled and said that he wanted to inform his father that he now had his own clinic, and at the same moment the couple heard a motor pull up, out of which Christopher got out with his bags. The elderly man saw his son and wept, and at the same time John rushed towards him and began to apologize for being such a stupid man. Soon Adriana was leaving the forester, but not only in the company of his daughter, but also John. The healer's son promised his father that he would show the girl to specialists and in the near future report on the results of treatment. And as it turned out, healing courage actually helped Christina, since the tests turned out to be good. Several years have passed. During this time, Adriana divorced Stephen and married John. They had a child together. It was a boy who was named Ignat. The couple took turns telling Adriana's parents during the summer, and then going to the countryside to visit John's father. Only now Adriana realized that she had met a worthy man, whom she loved with all her heart, and was confident in him in every way. John felt the same way, and often recalled their unusual acquaintance, which had almost turned into enmity. And on one of the days of such memories, Adriana said to her husband, "You know, I really want to go to the city where I started college. That's where Christina was born. And I promised I'd show you those places. What's the big deal? You promised. You keep your promise. We'll go through this town, especially since we're on our way to your parents' house, and then to my father's, right?" Happily said the woman and kissed her spouse on the lips. And soon the family was already driving a jeep in the town where Christina was born. The woman asked her husband to park the car and walk. The man complied with the request of his beloved, and in a few minutes the family was already standing on the street. Adriana corrected her sundress. Unshaven, took Christina under the arm and offered to walk. John took the 4-year-old son by the hand, and they slowly headed down the street. Just then, Adriana heard a loud exclamation, to which she turned around. The woman looked at the man and recognized him as her ex-spouse. She coldly rolled her eyes at him and wanted to continue on her way. But Stephen exclaimed that he was glad for the unexpected meeting and began showering Adriana with compliments and said that he recognized Adriana only by the tattoos she had made for him, and then pointed at Christina and asked, "This is my daughter. Hear that, banker? At one time you took your wife's bored child to the middle of nowhere and left for a mistress. And now, years later, when there was a chance meeting, you decided to pretend to be a father. That's not gonna happen. Christina has been calling my husband, who is standing next to me, Daddy for a long time. And about the tattoo, thank you for reminding me to look at it soon. Now go on your way and forget about us forever."
Subscribe and click the bell.
It was cold and people were huddled together. A young girl who was standing on the platform timidly looked around. She didn't like being so nervous. All these months, as she had planned the event, she had been calm, but now for some reason she was terribly nervous. Sometimes she felt like her heart was shaking. "Excuse me, may I see your ID?" the police officer said as she approached the platform exit. Yes, sorry," she said my words with her head. "That's okay. Everyone is a little unassembled this early," said the man with a smile, returning her documents. Kelly stepped out onto the platform. It was a little warmer here than in Moscow. The wind that gave away everything inside the station seemed to be less harsh. Kelly walked over to a bench and sat down so that it would blow less on her. People were walking around like a penguin, flopping from one foot to the other. Some hugged themselves with both arms, others leaned in close. It was cold. A dark blue bus with white stripes showed up on the horizon. Soon it was pulling onto the platform and people were approaching the entrance. Again, the checking of documents, tickets. That was it. It was okay to get on. As soon as Kelly climbed the steps, sat down in her seat, she immediately felt that she was gradually beginning to warm up to her father. All she wanted was for the bus to move, and for the people filling it to breathe. Everyone came in, rubbing their palms or rubbing their forearms. No one had expected that spring could be so pro-Moscow at night. But there were those who managed to put on warm jackets and now watched the irresponsible passengers with triumphant smiles. When the bus filled up, the driver got behind the wheel. Kelly put her headphones in her ears. No one sat down next to her. The bus was half empty. Apparently, all those people waiting on the platform. They were going to take a completely different route. Smooth music started playing. Kelly switched to rock. Right now, she wanted a distraction to make the nervousness stop. A woman came in with a folder, asking a question. Where she took off her headphones, the woman repeated it. "So who's going to the settlement? Put your hands up." "Yeah, I see," she said and made a few marks. A. Fedorov, not so good. "There's someone else who goes out to the small villages." I said Kelly, and then I said the name of the village. "Okay, guys, sleep. Don't worry, I'll tell the driver. He'll stop if there's anything to wake you up." "Good roads," she said, smiling, and got out. Kelly put the headphones back in her ears. The bus moved off a little while later. Pretty soon gray, unattractive. The station with the broken clock was gone. The city's high-rise buildings appeared. After a few more minutes, the private sector began, and in another 3 o'clock, the city disappeared. Lawn fields, forests, strips of land black from the fertile soil, and over it all stretched a gray sky that had yet to turn blue before dawn. Kelly closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Right now, the sooner she fell asleep, the better. After a few minutes, she fell into a restless sleep with constant awakenings. Still, it was better than staring at the road for long hours. A large, busy village spread out on the plain. Somewhere in the distance could be seen the tops of a forest. The river, which ran along the entire forested area unheard, ran between the rocks. From early morning and even before dawn, the voices of people were heard. Apparently, it was the gathering of those who were working in the city. The old woman woke up with the first rays of the sun. She still couldn't get used to this house that her son had given her relatively recently. The village where Betty had lived all her life had gradually died out. It was dangerous to stay there. Her son had moved Betty to a new place, bought her a nice new house, and now the old woman woke up and could hardly remember where she was. She had a sheet by her bedside with everything signed on it. Her illness was draining her of her last strength. Betty, with her will in her fist, continued to live, or at least tried to keep her activities stable. "Good morning, Betty," said the neighbor with a smile. A young woman was already standing near the bushes, watering the roses. The sun was slowly rising over the houses, whimsically illuminating the roofs in warm hues. "Good morning, but tonight is the night." "Wow," said the elderly woman. "Oh, don't tell me. We didn't expect it ourselves. We even put the heater on. It's spring already. It's like summer days are just around the corner. And I was afraid that the roses would freeze," said the neighbor. The older woman nodded. She smiled a little and then concentrated, looked around at the young trees that her son had recently planted. Apparently it was just cold, but it hadn't gotten to frost. She smiled because she was relieved that the trouble had passed. "Why are you here so early?" "Retirement, it's beautiful. And you don't have a vegetable garden as such. Everything's in greenhouses. It's time to get some sleep." The neighbor continued with a smile. "Oh, in the other world you laughed," said Betty. She frantically tried to remember the name of the neighbor, but cannot sleep in her old age. "My son is coming today. We need to prepare food, set the table. And it's a habit when you get up at dawn for decades. No old age can help you forget it." The neighbor nodded understandingly. The man came out, said something to her, and then disappeared back into the house. Betty went into the greenhouse, checked everything, and then returned to the house. She had to get ready for her son's arrival. She opened the book. The instruction sheet came across again. The elderly woman felt so helpless that tears just started to accumulate. She used to be so active, so cheerful, but now she sometimes forgot how to turn on the stove or where it was. There were days when Betty would wake up in her bedroom with fear, realizing she wasn't in her own home. Lately, she was thinking more and more about asking her son to go to a nursing home. Soon she wouldn't even remember her own kindred person by sight. Then what was the point of living among people? It was better to be near the medical staff, who would always remember her, help her in case of anything. A motor whirred outside. Betty glanced in the mirror, smiled at herself, and then stepped out onto the porch. Holding on to the railing, the older woman walked down the path toward the low gate. The man who stood by the car was smiling. She looked closely at his face, but couldn't remember. "Mom, I'm your son." Your son, look at the pictures together," he said, carefully holding out the picture to her. "Of course, Sonny, I'm not forgetting you," said Betty, but she had forgotten him. And every time the elderly woman thought about it, and she got scared. She was losing the last shreds of her memory, remembering with even more difficulty. "What's up? How are you doing? I see you cleaned up the yard. I told you I'd come and clean it up myself. You shouldn't have done that. You should take care of your heart and joints." With care in his voice, Michael said, "Oh, son Michael, I didn't do anything. I took some eggs to the neighbor. I asked him to clean up a few bundles of greens. He took it all to me. But look how beautiful it is," said the old woman. She spread her hands. Betty would never admit to her son that she didn't like this house and yard. She would rather stay in that abandoned village than try to accept her loneliness here. She wished frantically that some of her family would stay by her side. But that was no longer possible. And Betty's greatest fear was that one day she would not be able to remember her own son, would not let him on her doorstep, would die alone. They entered the house, where everything was fine, even though the disease had taken away not only her memory, but her strength as well. Betty tried to keep the house clean. She was afraid of waking up one day to see that she was living as if in a stable. Her son was glad that his mother continued to be herself, but he tried not to notice how lonely she was here, despite how many people were around. "Mom, I came to talk to you. Why don't I hire a nurse for you?" he asked. "Why do I need a stranger here?" Betty asked in astonishment. "No, Sonny, I don't need strangers here. It's a pity you have a lot of work. You should come here more often. I miss you, Michael. Oh, I miss you so much," she said with her head down. "Mom, I have to go to another country for a few months. A complicated, long business trip. And I wanted to tell you something about you. Anyway, as soon as I come from the business trip, I'll make you happy," said Michael. You could literally see on his face that he was getting off the subject. But Betty tried not to notice it. After all, she had a grown son who was entitled to his secrets. She forgot his name again. The older woman looked at the man, and the man smiled. "Son, how long are you traveling for?" she asked. "A couple months. And you're sure you can manage on your own? If you realize you can't handle it, call me right away. I'll leave you a note by the phone so you'll remember to call me anytime, and I'll send someone right away." "Okay," he said with a smile. Michael would not tell his mother that he was leaving also because he was terribly tired of her. Catastrophically tired of watching his mother fade before his eyes. He couldn't see her struggling to remember his face, and struggling even harder to remember his name. He wondered if she remembered that he wasn't an only child. Michael shook his head negatively as if he was having an internal dialogue. "Big girl. Can handle it, sure," the older woman said. And then she laughed. "Mom, do you really, if anything, call me? I hope I can get through this faster. I've got my career in full swing. You can't stop now. "No offense," Michael said. "Oh, son, don't worry. I was young once too. I wanted to live. It's awful. Don't worry about me, live and be happy. I'll be fine. You'll see," she said. The old woman smiled, patted her son on the shoulder. The name never came to her mind. Betty sadly noticed that she was getting worse. But she wouldn't tell her son about it, so he wouldn't worry, so he wouldn't cancel his plans for her. A few hours later, they were already standing in the yard. Betty was holding a bowl of pie she had made for her son. He took them to hug them goodbye, saying some amazing words to her. Michael got into the automobile. His mother, who was standing near the fence, waved him off. He would drive away, and perhaps in an hour the elderly woman would not remember him. Michael felt a prick of conscience, some unpleasant inner agitation. He had a strong feeling that he was abandoning his mother in a difficult situation. But he had been trying for so many years to get her out, to help her, that he had almost no strength left. There was a struggle going on inside Michael. On the one hand, he wanted to give his mother to a nursing home, where she would be under constant supervision. On the other hand, at the mere thought he felt guilty, as if he were abandoning her to her fate, depriving her of the last bit of normal life. The village itself was already behind him. He drove towards the airport, replayed in his head the situations that had happened recently, and became afraid of the thought that he would arrive one day, and he would be met by a completely alien look of the woman who was actually his mother. Michael left the car at home, gave the keys to a friend. He took a cab to the airport, where his girlfriend was already waiting for him. When he left, the world would slow down for a while, and all worries would cease to have power over him. Right now, he needed a distraction. His mother wasn't going anywhere. The bus pulled up to a large village. When it stopped, Kelly was sound asleep. She jumped up when someone touched her shoulder lightly. The girl got off the bus in a friendly manner, waving to the passengers who were watching her tiredly, glad apparently that her trip had come to an end, and they still had a long drag to get to their destination. Kelly took a deep breath, crouched down a few times, because her legs stiffened horribly. The old man who sat at the bus stop looked at her carefully. All the locals roughly knew each other, and any outsiders were suspicious. "Excuse me, could you tell me where Betty lives around here?" Kelly asked. The old man looked up thoughtfully, with a nodding lip. Apparently he was trying to remember, but only shook his head negatively. His eyes brightened in a flash. "And how is it that right down this street, right there, the house will be blue, you can't miss it?" "Right from that house. To the right is a white openwork fence, and behind it is a light-colored two-story house. That's where she lives. And who are you?" asked the old man. "Daughter, my brother, and I have a difficult relationship. You know, family. He moved my mother. He didn't even tell me. So I've been looking for her. How did you know she was getting worse? So I thought I'd come down. Live with her," Kelly said, with a smile. "You're so smart. It's really hard for your mom to forget things on the go. Sometimes she can't even remember how to get home from the store. It's good that she came to live, not just to visit for a couple hours, like your brother. Women have a kinder heart than we men," the old man said. Kelly smiled. She followed the route, but she was a little confused. She seemed to find the blue house too. All the fences turned out to be similar to each other, and the houses themselves were typical. It was immediately noticeable that the village was modern and old, where the shabby huts could not be called houses. The girl, to suggest something, asked a short, full-figured, lovely woman, "I'm still very pretty. I was told to turn from here, but I'm confused. I'm the daughter. I can't find her." "So unfamiliar," Kelly said. "Oh, there's her house," the woman said with a smile, pointing to the house with her palm. "Thank you so much," Kelly said with a smile. As she walked up to the fence, she began to pull an envelope out of her bag. The envelope fit a little, but she tried to straighten it out. "Can I help you?" Betty asked when she saw the girl at the gate. The old woman was embarrassed every time someone came to see her. Maybe it was a relative. Maybe it was an old friend she couldn't remember. "Mom, it's me. Look," she held out a picture of Betty, Michael, and Kelly all together. "God, I got here so late. I didn't even know you'd gotten worse." Michael wouldn't tell me anything. He kept saying everything was fine. "Mommy, I'm so sorry." The old woman stared at her with an absent look. Apparently, she was trying to remember, and then her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my daughter, I forgot you." With bitterness in her voice, said Betty. Neighbors came out of their houses, watching the story. Some even shed a tear, imagining how old age might affect each of them. "Mommy, don't worry. I came to live with you. Everything will be fine. Don't worry. Now we'll help together. I'll get started. You can't get rid of me now," said Kelly and laughed. As soon as the old woman heard that she would no longer live alone, she shook inside. She cried even more, unable to hold back her emotions. Betty felt some treacherous feeling inside that tormented her, as if she was forcing herself to remember her own daughter. They entered the neighbor's house and gradually dispersed and went about their business. Betty sat at the table and Kelly clapped at the stove. She was frying pancakes and deftly flipping them with one hand. The girl clearly looked happy. Betty looked at her, but struggled to remember any interactions. But could she rely on her own memory now? The older woman looked sadly at her daughter. "And Michael, when was the last time, Mom?" "By God, they should have put devils on him. Why does he come so rarely?" Kelly asked, exasperated. Betty ran her eyes over the pictures. She couldn't remember who Michael was. And the son. The older woman remarked aloud, "So he's away on a business trip. As far as I don't know, I can't remember it, but he left me a note by the phone. Can you look at it?" "All right, later, Mom, later. In the meantime, let's eat with you." "Do you have any jam?" Kelly asked. "Yeah, in the basement. Get your favorite cherry," said Betty. She had no idea. Why did she suddenly remember cherry? The old woman smiled. Already she knew and enjoyed the fact that she was no longer sitting here alone. No more quiet evenings in an empty house. No more trying to remember the loved ones who had left her here. "Where will you be?" "Oh yes," Betty said, remembering that the guest room was always empty. "Mom, don't worry." "Okay, that's it, we'll live together. After all, you can't remember everything in the world and keep it in your head. Really, if you forget something, even my name, if you forget it, just tell me, I'll remind you, and I won't be ashamed. It's not your fault." Kelly persisted. They chatted merrily. Kelly reminisced about her childhood. Betty only recorded those memories as her own. It was as if her daughter was helping her to rebuild her past life. For the first time in a long time, the older woman fell asleep without tears. She knew she would wake up tomorrow. She would read the leaf and then go about her business as usual. But her soul was warmed by the thought that her daughter was with her now. She wouldn't be gone in a day. In a week she would be there for her. Betty fell asleep with a warm sense of security, with love in her soul. Kelly woke up, listening to her surroundings. Everything around her seemed to be asleep. The girl slowly got out of bed, walked over to the older woman's bedroom, but she was asleep. Kelly went downstairs, took a pair of scissors, threw over the counter, and cut the telephone wire. She took off the note that was on the phone there and put it in her pocket. The girl walked all over the first floor, taking the albums, hiding them. Taking a few pictures out of the frames, she also hid them and put them in her pocket. Kelly did her best to make sure that nothing else in this house reminded her of Michael. The only thing that mattered now was to make Betty feel safe. When all the work was done, Kelly went out onto the porch. She lit a cigarette, leaning back. The tall wooden post that supported the roof of the porch. Kelly looked at the clock. It would soon be dawn. Tomorrow she would be a model daughter again. In the meantime, it was okay to just stand there, smoke. Don't worry about the woman's reaction. Sooner or later, Betty would find out she was smoking anyway. But for now, you had to keep up the good work. The girl put out her cigarette, went up to the bedroom, and dozed off again. The next time she woke up, there was the pleasant aroma of apple pillows coming from somewhere downstairs. As she went downstairs, rubbing her eyes, Betty looked at the girl carefully, then nodded as if to show that she remembered her. "Come on, daughter, sit down. We had breakfast together. Will you tell me why you came to your mother? And don't lie. Young girls don't just go back to the village," Betty said. Contrary to Kelly's doubts, the old woman didn't notice anything, neither the missing photos, nor the missing albums, nor even the fact that the usual notes were gone. Kelly laid out new notes in her own handwriting. She also put a photo on the table next to her mother's bed. And in that photo, she was already alone. Betty's mom divorced her, Kelly said. I know. You're going to say it's a shame, that I should have kept the family together. But I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Oh, come on, it's not a shame. I'm not the same person I used to be. I'm sorry, my daughter, if I said any nasty things to you. I don't remember now, Betty said. What's so terrible? I'm sick of his drinking. Remember how Dad used to drink? I promised you till the grave that I'd never choose a man like that. What did Mom end up doing? She ended up marrying a drunk? I had no idea it was that bad. He drank, beat me, kept asking me to have a baby. And I ran away. I filed for divorce as soon as I got the divorce papers. Ran to you, she said. Kelly deliberately didn't mention Michael. She wanted to see if her mother would remember for a moment that Kelly had a brother who could help her, but the older woman only shook her head negatively. Sympathizing with her daughter, she gave her advice, repeating that Kelly had done the right thing. Daughter, you're wasting your life here with me. Do you really want to stay? Asked the old woman. I want to spend time with my mom. There's no life to lose. It's great. You smell so good here. It's got its own atmosphere. Don't worry, we'll be fine, Kelly said. The next day, they had a pretty normal schedule. The days went by. Gradually, they built up their own schedule. The old woman was so used to not living alone that even her memories did not include tear-filled evenings. They had dinner together, cooked, looked after the household, where she cleverly reminded her mother, discreetly prompting her what her name was, who she was, and what kind of life the old woman had led before the bony fingers of disease touched her. Quietly, Betty wept, but already she was partly crying. That her daughter lived with her, and that in this life together the old woman did not even remember her ailment. One day they were gardening. Kelly was pruning shrubs, and the older woman was giving her advice on what to do next. The neighbor who was having her bouquet cut came to them. Here, Betty cut you some, she said with a smile. Thank you very much. We'll put you a point. We'll be happy, the older woman said. Michael, when is he coming? Asked the neighbor, where she splashed out abruptly, looked in their direction. She hadn't foreseen that the neighbors might disturb her perfect picture. Now Betty stood and looked intently at the neighbor. Michael who? Betty wondered. Your son, said the neighbor. I don't have any son. The older woman said insistently and thanked her again for the flowers. Mommy, you go inside and I'll talk to Adriana, Kelly said. And you could hear the trembling in her voice. The old woman nodded a third time, thanking her for the flowers, and left. Adriana looked at Kelly carefully, then at the closed door. She couldn't figure out what was going on. They were having a big fight. I've tried to make it up to her, but it just makes it worse for the mother. She's having a heart attack. Michael wants to put her in a nursing home. She's screaming that he wants to get rid of her, that she doesn't have a son. Please don't remind her of that, because her heart's not made of iron, Kelly said thoughtfully. What a bunch of men. But they just want the responsibility off their backs. Okay, I hear you. You're good to stay with your mom. Who knows what's going to happen to her if she's out here all alone? Did you talk to the doctor? Michael says he gave your mother a tiny sentence. Keeps saying she won't make it through the winter, the neighbor said to muffle her own voice. Yeah, I saw the papers. That's actually why I came to stay. I don't want her to be alone for 3 months, Kelly said. An old woman watched the conversation from the window. What son? What made the neighbor think she had a son? The old woman looked around, but the pictures showed her with either strangers or her daughter. Betty remembered for some reason that she had lived here recently. The neighbor must have just gotten confused. When Kelly entered the house, she had a wary look on her face. Betty looked at her daughter and immediately smiled. Oh, Mom, don't worry, it's just a mix-up. You're new here, and everyone knows each other. Don't worry. We just talked it over with her. She remembered that she mistook you for the aunt who lived here before. Kelly literally came up with it on the fly. The old woman was perfectly happy with that answer. But her health began to fail before her eyes. After a couple of days, Betty fell ill, and then she refused to eat or drink at all. Adriana. I woke up to a loud banging on the door. She was trying to wipe her eyes. Went out into the hallway and swung the door open. saw a frightened Kelly. The girl had huge eyes, pale skin, and an easy-to-read mask of fright. "Aunt Adriana, call an ambulance." The mother's cell phone's not working for some reason. "My cell phone's out of range. It's bad and she's suffocating." Heart palpitations, Kelly blurted out. Adriana woke up and in a second she was up from her seat, running to the phone. Then the older woman had already called an ambulance. Kelly was out of sight. Already the ambulance pulled up to the house. The doctor came in. He knew the patient's diagnosis. He had to reacquaint himself with her. Despite the fact that it was the 10th time she had been reacquainted, she flatly refused to go, Kelly said. Shaking her head negatively, the doctor had already relieved the patient's condition. Now he went down to the first floor with his daughter. Such a disease. And age too. It's not surprising. You can go and get the medicine. I'll leave you the prescription. But you don't get your hopes up, the doctor said. Kelly handed him the papers and he read them carefully, but shook his head no. You can't even expect her to make it through the winter. If she even lived for a month. Thanks for that, as they say. It's a tough case. Honestly, with these abnormalities, she should have been in the ground a long time ago. Thank God she's been with you this long, the doctor said. Kelly walked out onto the porch with him and then escorted him to the ambulance. The doctor looked worried. I'm afraid it's my fault. She had a big fight with someone. And I reminded her of that person. What if her heart fluttered because of it? Kelly asked. The doctor looked her in the eye, and she somehow calmed it down when she looked back. Despite what had happened, the man remained calm, composed. Don't worry with such an affliction. It's not your fault. Just stay with her a little longer. And change your SIM card so you can call her immediately, the doctor said. Kelly nodded. The ambulance drove away, leaving her alone. The girl stared after the departing car, hugging herself with both arms. She hadn't counted on the elderly woman getting sick so soon. She had an entirely different plan. Kelly returned to her mother's bed, already sound asleep after the medicine. The girl leaned her palm against her forehead. Her skin was clammy and cold from sweat. Kelly sat by the bed for several hours. She didn't notice herself dozing off in the chair. When she woke up, Betty was trying to get out of bed. Mommy's doctor said you need to lie down, Kelly said. Who are you? Oh my God, my daughter, I'm sorry, said the older woman. It was evident with what anguish she remembered her daughter, and now she was back on the bed, where she helped to change the bedclothes, put the mother down again, changed her into a clean shirt. The older woman had absolutely no strength. Call Ethan. We need to talk, she said. Kelly nodded. She went downstairs. She found Ethan's number on the note. When she called him and outlined the situation, the man promised to be there within a few hours. Not quite noon, a dark, low new car pulled up outside the house. Out of it stepped an elderly, stately man who clearly did not want to admit his age. Well, Betty, it's good of you to call, Ethan said. Mom, you asked me to call him, said you had business with him. Remember? Kelly asked insistently. She turned to the man. I'm sorry, she was sick tonight. An ambulance was called. The man nodded. Daughter, I need you to pick up some papers down there in the closet. I wrote a letter the other day, but I can't get up anymore, Betty said with sadness in her voice. Kelly brought in the papers. They had a dry conversation. Betty's entire will have been drawn up in advance, apparently a few days before she'd gotten worse. The old woman had described all her assets and savings to her daughter's only child. Daughter, what's her name? Asked the man. Kathy said the girl who had previously introduced herself as Kelly. Betty nodded. She was having trouble remembering what had happened half an hour ago, and certainly couldn't remember her daughter's name. Kathy realized that her mother would never remember it in just a couple of hours, so as soon as Ethan left, she would be Kelly again. So as not to scare the neighbors or confuse them, Ethan went downstairs with Kelly. The girl nodded at everything he said. He was giving her warnings. Now they had already reached the car. A déjà vu formed in the girl's mind. Not long ago, she was standing next to an ambulance. Now this notary. I think it's time you took care of the funeral arrangements. It's not cheap these days. And you know, it takes time. Your mother doesn't seem to have time. I'm sorry. "I've been in this business a long time, but sorry every time," he said. It's strange that she disinherited her son. She wanted revenge. Apparently, he wanted to put her in a nursing home. You know, older people are very vindictive, especially if the people closest to them want to leave them alone or dump them in some place where no one will want them, Kelly said. Ethan nodded, said goodbye to her, then got into the car. Kelly stood for a few minutes, then did all the chores in the yard. She cleaned up the grass that had been mowed yesterday, checked the greenhouses. Except that the shrubs they'd planted the other day suddenly started to wither. It had been a few days. Kelly woke up in the morning and for the first time in a long time did not feel any sounds. Whereas before she had awakened to the aroma of food, after the worsening of her illness she could hear mumbling. The elderly woman was reading, a little audibly out loud. To herself, she was very poor at assimilating information. Now in this lying position, she had only one joy left. Books. Kelly showered, changed her clothes, and entered Betty's bedroom. The woman was still asleep. "Mom, it's late to wake up. I must have turned off the alarm clock. Let's get some medicine," Kelly said. But when she got to her mother, she was stunned. She wasn't breathing. Kelly sobbed. She screamed, and apparently through the open window, the neighbor heard everything. Adriana came running to their rescue. And when she saw the whole scene, her heart sank. She took Kelly out of the room, took her downstairs, and made her wash up. "You be quiet. Come on, everybody already knew she was gonna die soon. What are you getting so excited about? That's the way you act before you have a heart attack," the woman said. Kelly gradually began to calm down. It was hard to accept the fact that she was going to live here for 6 months, and ended up staying only a month and a half, maybe even a little less. You're good for coming, right? Now imagine if she'd been all alone, dying. Or worse, couldn't even call an ambulance that day. Think about how happy she was these last weeks, that she didn't spend them alone. To hell with her son. He'd left her and moved away. The neighbor read, trying to be supportive of Kelly. She only nodded. Slowly, she came to her senses. She had to pull herself together pretty quickly, because all the things had to be taken care of in a short period of time. Kelly knew where the money was. She counted it for a rainy day, called a special service, talked everything over, and signed the papers. The date for the funeral was set. Everything else would be done without her involvement. Kelly decided not to have a wake in the classic sense of the word. Her mother hardly remembered anyone. Therefore, there were few people here who socialized with her. The girl gathered baskets of food, distributed them among the neighbors, and at the same time those who came several times to check on the old woman during these days. But even though there was no wake, a decent number of people had gathered for the funeral. They all stood slumped in their heads, watching the coffin being lowered. After a couple hours, there was no one left but Kelly. She was still standing by the cross, looking at the small picture of the elderly woman where she was smiling. Kelly went back into the house, began to pack her things. Someone had come to pick her up. Adriana, who was chatting with the girl, went to the fence most of all to exchange a few phrases. But seeing how busy Kelly was, she went inside. "Are you leaving?" Adriana asked. "I thought you were going to stay here for good, or are you just taking the pain of losing your mother?" "I'm selling. I inherited the house, and I'm selling it," she said. "I know it must be hard to be in a place where your mother was all alone. But you know, I wouldn't sell a house if I were you. Just move somewhere else. Then fix it up. It's such a great place," she said with a smile. Where did she suddenly find out? Looked at Adriana. And why did this woman suddenly think she could give her any advice? The girl was still standing, as if trying to find the words, but there was no strength. "I told you I'm leaving." "So I'll leave," Kelly said calmly. Not half an hour later, she loaded her suitcases into the car, closed the house, and then got into the car and drove away. The neighbors were whispering. Apparently they had their own gossip about it. Adriana. I looked longingly at the house where the friendly old lady used to live, and now who knows who is going to move in. She took one last look at the car lurking in the distance, and then went off to her room. Kelly sat in the passenger seat, thinking back to the funeral and how it had gone too fast, too painful for her. She really had been preparing herself for a longer journey. But fate had decided otherwise. I thought you'd be back later. Don't get me wrong. It's hard to accept death. But on the other hand, you won't have to live in this village anymore. Fresh air, green grass, it's all great. But when you're used to city life with all the comforts of home, I don't know. I feel like the countryside is becoming some kind of prison without communication, the woman behind the wheel said. Kelly was silent. Maybe she didn't want to discuss anything, or maybe she just wanted to be quiet now. After all, everything had gone relatively well, but she knew that there was more to it than that. As soon as Michael returned, the situation would take a more dangerous turn, and it would be a good idea to finish everything before Michael showed up and possibly ruined her life. Aren't you afraid of the consequences? The voice came again and pulled Kathy out of her thoughts. Now it was hard for her to even think of herself in her familiar name, as if she had not just pretended to be Kelly during this time, but had been her. I know it's going to be hard and probably a lot worse than I realize, but I've already committed to it. There's no turning back, and there's no reason to, she said. But the important thing is to make sure everything goes smoothly, especially since he missed you so much. Yesterday, he even cried that he hadn't seen you for a long time, said the woman behind the wheel. I do everything for him. You know that very well. I hope everything goes well. Then I don't know, I'll probably be thanking all the possible gods on my knees, Kathy said. Everything's gonna be okay. I'm sure that fate must come down on you at some point. After all, it's long overdue, the woman said. The car had long since left the neighborhood where it had been in the village. Both women changed the topic of conversation. Now they were talking about something mundane. Neither of them recalled the funeral or Betty. Not all the machinations Kathy had dared to engage in, taking advantage of the situation. Kathy remembered her son's face, imagined how all the torment would end in one fell swoop. If she were offered the chance to go through it all again, to save her son, she would do it. Michael was sitting on the airplane with his fiancée, and she was holding his hand, but very weakly. The man knew that she had dozed off almost immediately after takeoff, but he hadn't been able to sleep. He was literally being eaten alive by guilt. He'd abandoned his mother, lied to her about the business trip, just so he could spend time alone with his fiancée. He planned to be there in a couple months to introduce his mother to his lover. Now the only thing he had to do was go to the cemetery. And who was in charge of the funeral then? He didn't want to think about it. He'd gotten a call to let him know. A condolence call, and that was it. How much longer? Christina asked. She opened her eyes a little. Her face showed signs of fatigue. So many hours of flying. Anyone would be tired here. Christina stood up in her seat, adjusted her seatbelt, which she would never unbuckle. For the entire flight, she pulled a crumpled lollipop out of her purse, popped it in her mouth to stop the nausea. Landing in 200, he said, and she nodded. Didn't feel like discussing anything right now. She leaned back in her chair, looked at her future husband. It did not escape Christina's eyes that Michael looked depressed. She was aware of the situation, but she didn't understand why he should be so upset about it. The man knew his mother was seriously ill. He knew it could happen in his absence, but somehow he still felt guilty. You need to calm down. You can't spend the rest of your life blaming yourself, she asked me. I left her, you don't understand. She was out there dying alone while I was grilling you on the beach. I knew it was dangerous to leave her. I feel like a traitor, Michael said. Christina shrugged. She pulled the blindfold over her eyes, which had just been on her forehead the whole time. Michael was not surprised by her detachment. Christina had always been less emotional than he was. He loved her, was willing to marry anything to make her happy. This whole situation had significantly undermined their relationship. Michael began to snap at his fiancée, barely restrained emotions. But even he understood perfectly well that in him speaks guilt. It's not your fault, Michael. Your mother was gravely ill. She died. It happens. Especially since you knew the doctor's prognosis was overly optimistic. She didn't even remember you before she died. There's no point in worrying, Christina said. Michael got up, walked along the cabin of the plane, went into the restroom. He stood there for about 10 minutes to calm down and only came out when the knocking started. Michael felt defeated. No support, not even from his fiancée. For the first time, Christina's coldness had hurt him so much. How could he not think about his mother's death? How could he not think about leaving her alone while he sunbathed and enjoyed his vacation? When he returned, Christina didn't say a word to him. Apparently, she was dozing off again, or maybe she was pretending not to talk to him about anything. After landing, everything was standard. Michael picked up the suitcase. They left for the car that was already waiting for them. After a couple hours or so, they were at the apartment. The first thing the girl did was head to the shower to clean herself up. When she came out almost an hour later, she looked clearly better than she had on the airplane. The man followed her example. When he got out of the shower, Christina was arranging food from containers. Only at dinner time. Both of them realized how hungry they were. Christina never ate on an airplane, and certainly not before the flight. She gets carsick a lot. Such were her methods of caution. Michael didn't eat because he was very anxious. It was impossible to get even a handful of food down. "Listen, let's go to the cemetery tomorrow. You apologize to your mother and calm down. I don't want to see your tired and upset face all the time. I understand you're upset. But I also want to have a husband by my side, not a personally sad boy," Christina said. He nodded. He didn't argue with her. Maybe Christina was right. It was time to pull himself out of this state. Early the next morning, the man was already behind the wheel. Christina immediately declined, citing that she had jet lag. After how long they had been at the airport before their flight, how long the flight had been delayed, she was understandable. Michael had expected her to travel with him to support him, but she stayed home. As the man drove up to the village, he passed the mother's house. He felt like a traitor, felt some inner emptiness. All the way the man was tormented by a constant sense of guilt, which only grew. Here before him grew unnaturally huge wrought iron gates of the cemetery. They were very old. The rusty gate would probably never close again. The old man, the cemetery caretaker, glanced quickly at Michael, then turned his attention back to the card game he was busy playing. His opponent didn't even look at the newcomer. Michael pulled out a bouquet of flowers, entered the gate. His mother bought her own place in the cemetery, about 6 months before she died, so he knew where to go. Here at last showed a mound of earth, a beautiful carved cross, and a small photograph. There were plenty of fresh flowers. Even though Mother had been dead for over a month. "Forgive me if you can," Michael said quietly. He couldn't say another word. A lump rose in his throat, preventing him from crying or saying anything. Somewhere inside, a painful sense of worthlessness was growing. When Michael looked up, he saw a familiar silhouette. He recognized Adriana almost immediately as his mother's roommate. He wanted to close himself off, to fall through the ground and run away. He wanted to do anything to avoid being seen. He didn't want to hear what a disgusting person he was for leaving his mother all alone with such a serious illness. Adriana had already seen him, changed course, headed straight for him. Michael realized that an unpleasant conversation could not be avoided. He went outside the fence to wait for his mother's neighbor. You couldn't tell from her face that Adriana was angry. Her face was rather just sad. "Hello, Michael," she said. Michael nodded. He realized that she was trying to find the words. Of course, anyone would be trying to find words after all that had happened. Adriana looked at him with an unhappy, frustrated look. He only smiled crookedly. The man didn't know what was worth saying now. "I guess I should be saying that you did good. You bought your mother a house. But honestly, I blame you. You left her alone and ran off to work," Adriana said, in an unhappy tone. Michael suddenly thought that her hatred would have been even stronger if she'd found out that he'd gone away not for work, but just to vacation with his future wife. He simply lowered his head so as not to diffuse the conflict. "She didn't remember anyone here. Looked at me like a new gate every time, and you left her alone. At least Kelly's here." "Thanks for that," Adriana said. "Kelly's here?" Michael asked. She nodded. The man looked worried. Apparently, he was trying to remember who Kelly was and who might have come to see his mother. Adriana paid no attention to the fact that he looked a little lost. The poor girl had fiddled with her so much. "Your mother had gotten so sick in a few days before she died that she went blind." Well, Kelly didn't ask anyone for help. Cooked and cleaned and bathed her. Everything she did to make the old lady comfortable. If it wasn't for her, you'd be a mother. Couldn't even call an ambulance for herself. Did you even know she cut her own phone cord? Adriana asked. Michael looked at his mother's former roommate in amazement. She didn't even look at him. All this time, Adriana was just staring at the grave of her former neighbor. She shook her head negatively. I'm going to have a baby. I wish I hadn't done what you did. How scary is it when you can't remember anything? And you were left alone. Gee, Michael expects karma from his own children, Adriana said. And when did Kelly arrive? Asked Michael, letting the threats pass his ears. The same day you left. You should at least ask her. You probably didn't even leave her any money. It's not for nothing that your mother said she has no son with sons like that. I'd rather not know my father. Adriana decided not to listen to any answers. She turned around and walked towards the familiar grave where she was originally headed. Michael was completely confused, standing there looking at the grave. Not many people her mother remembered from her past. After all, she had plenty of girlfriends. It was odd that his sister's name was Kelly, but it was unlikely that she would have been at his mother's house, much less cared for her. Michael stood for a few more minutes. He apologized to his mother one last time and then walked to the car. He replayed over and over in his head everything that had been said until he was completely confused by the story. One thing was clear, the mother didn't seem to have died alone. It took a long time for the man to leave. It was either guilt or some inner turmoil that prevented him from moving. There was also a strange sense of unspoken. As soon as Michael started the car, the phone rang. Michael picked up the phone and heard the familiar voice of an old friend. Listen, Michael, are you in town? Asked the man, and there was anxiety in his voice. Nearby has already happened. What? Michael was worried. I need you to come up to the office. These things are not discussed over the phone. You know that. It's obviously not a legal thing. Can you come down today? The man asked. I'll be there in an hour and a half, if there's no traffic, Michael said. Now the situation got even weirder. First, some Kelly, then a call from a friend. Everything was connected. Michael turned on the radio so he wouldn't have to think about anything. He hoped the music, the announcers' voices would help distract him. But instead, he kept going over in his head what had happened, and how could it be explained. Michael felt in his gut that the situation was just beginning to gain momentum. The man pulled up outside the law office. He left the car and went up to the right floor. Sebastian shook his hand firmly and in a matter of minutes took him to his office. He took out copies of the papers and handed them to Michael. We can only hope for your honesty. These are copies of your mother's will. Are you aware that she left you with nothing? He asked. Sebastian looked troubled. Michael, who had not yet grasped the situation, ran his eyes over the papers, trying to figure things out for himself. This can't be happening. I don't understand. Where's the name? Who gets everything then? Michael asked. That's the interesting part. I don't know who did it and how they did it. But here's the last copy, all the apartment accounts. The house in the village went to Kathy, Sebastian muttered, holding out another sheet. Michael first blushed, then turned pale. It was obvious that he was completely confused, hardly aware of what was going on. The information was coming at him in an avalanche. He looked up at Sebastian. Sebastian, I have no idea who Kathy is. It's the first time I've ever heard that last name. I'll hold on. There's something fishy going on here. First, my mother's roommate tells me that Kelly was helping her. This is Kathy all over again, said Michael. Sebastian went through the paperwork again, too. But there was no mention of a Kelly, not even close. It was all jumbled up into one endless story. Sebastian took all the papers back and put them in a folder. But after thinking for a couple minutes, he shoved them into his bag. He couldn't let himself get caught red-handed. He'd already broken a lot of laws while he was sneaking copies through the courts. We just digitized the office. Our whole system's changed. I saw your mother's initials, last name, when I saw there was nothing left for you. I realized there was something fishy going on. I thought I'd make copies. If you tell anyone, believe me, not only will I be fired, But I won't even be able to get a job afterwards, Sebastian said in a guilty voice. He realized that his friend might go to the police, but he hoped he was being reasonable. Michael only nodded, staring at one point. "Don't worry, I won't go anywhere. I'll have to do some digging." "I don't like this whole story at all," Michael muttered. Michael didn't want to back down. He kept everything he just heard and seen in his head. He dialed the phone number, erasing it. The man sat there, thinking for a few minutes. He dialed the right phone number after all. Pretty soon, the young woman who answered on the other end of the phone promised to call an old lady. Michael was answered by an old friend of his mother's, whom she must have long since forgotten. "Hello, Michael. I'm sorry for your loss. It's a great loss to lose your mommy," said the woman, shaking her head negatively. "Christina, I have a few questions for you. Can you tell me if Kelly was a friend of yours? I was told that my mother was helped by a Kelly before she died, and now I can't find her to thank her. You see, I went on a business trip to another country. I didn't even know what was going on here," Michael said. The elderly woman thought for a while when her voice broke again. All the man's hopes were dashed. "We didn't have any Kelly. Only your sister, as I recall. But that was it. I was surprised at the time. Such a rare name for a girl," the old woman said. "Does Kathy or does the name Kathy mean anything to you?" Michael insisted. He really wanted to know what was going on after all. It was scary to just be in the dark like this, realizing that his mother had been tricked. "Kathy," repeated the older woman. She stopped talking. She was staring at the wall, but Michael couldn't see her. He could only hear her heavy breathing. She was about his mother's age. No wonder her health was failing. "Cross my heart, Michael. I don't remember any Kathy." "You go to the village itself, ask the neighbors. What are you waiting for? They must know by now. They're all out in the open. It's you city folk who shut yourselves off from each other. In the country, everything's on display." "All right, Michael. Tired. I guess I'll go," she said. Michael said goodbye to the old woman. He arrived home, but he still couldn't sleep. Until the morning, the man replayed in his head everything that had happened. He didn't really explain anything to his wife, and he didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. What was the use? Christina would not support him anyway, and there was no sense in having a conversation for nothing. Early in the morning, Michael was already sitting in the car and writing down everything he needed to find out. He needed to figure out who Kathy was. Also, who was Kelly, who showed up, helped his mother, then disappeared. What if his mother had been under the control of some black realtors all along? It was scary to think that once again he hadn't kept her safe. Michael started the car, drove to the village, trying to distract himself with another program on the radio. The car crossed the village road, and finally the typical village houses came into view. Michael, who had already gone over the questions dozens of times in his head, was ready to talk. The man who lived directly across the street from Michael's mother had said something great. Now the cabin looked vital and empty. Even looking at it was eerie. More recently, laughter could be heard from there. Lively conversations, and now the black windows looked eerily across the street. "Hello, Uncle. What kind of maiden came to see her mother when she had been bad the last few days?" asked Michael, deciding not to start from afar. "So she came, I think, the same day you left. Although, you know, Michael, I probably don't remember most of it myself. I'm on medication. But my memory's suffering. Nice girl, I remember helping your mother, laughing all the time, saying they had a full family now," said the man, shrugging his shoulders. "What's going on over there?" asked Lisa, leaving the house. The uncle's wife looked worried. She stepped closer. The man outlined the situation to her. "Yes, a nice girl kind. Hair like that, you know, shoulder length. Eyes dark, almost black, skin a little swarthy, pretty, you can tell." "I wondered how such a pretty girl got to the village," said Lisa with her hands. "She looks like her," Michael asked, realizing that the answer would be no. In the picture, he was next to another dark-haired girl. "Oh no, it was different. What's the matter? Did you lose it? You and your sisters are brothers, always losing touch, running away. And then there's no end in sight. You should go to Adriana. They've been talking well. They probably call each other back," said Lisa. Michael nodded and almost immediately turned abruptly and went to the neighboring house. He knocked, and a few minutes later Adriana came out. She was wrapped in a warm robe over Mask's face. Michael frowned. "Come in, Michael, do not be afraid. The tooth is being treated." So I put the mask on. The smell of the medicine is creepy. I'm freezing because my teeth hurt. "Come in, don't be afraid," she said, pointing to the gazebo. "Yeah, I'll just be a couple minutes. I don't have time to sit around much," said Michael. "I'm sorry I snapped at you then," said Adriana. Apologizing tone. "Oh, come on. I understand perfectly. I blame myself. Can you tell me who Kelly was that looked like?" Michael held out the same picture again. "No, I don't know this girl at all. Don't you know where to find your own sister? Even though she said you haven't spoken to her in 7 years. You can't do that, Michael. You've got a mother now. No, you've got to stick together. You're on opposite sides of the barricade," Adriana said in that tone of voice. "I haven't spoken to my sister in 4 years, but now we call every day. I'm afraid we'll lose each other." Michael looked very carefully at Adriana's face. He apparently couldn't put 2 and 2 together, and his head was filled with white noise. He tried to concentrate on the conversation, but it wasn't working. I had her phone number, but she wasn't answering. I guess she decided to change things up. She packed up after the funeral and left the same day. The house is still standing. Sometimes some people come by, so she must have put it up for sale, Adriana said. Michael thanked her warmly for the phone number and then went back to the car. He turned the car around, leaving dust behind him. Michael tried to call the phone number several times along the way, but nothing worked. Nervousness was starting to push through the upper limits. Just a little more and he would start to get angry. Michael entered the apartment, but did not answer his wife's questions, but went straight to the shower. He stood under the icy jets, already completely out of his mind. "Michael, can you explain to me what is going on?" Christina insistently spoke, obviously dissatisfied with the fact that she had to literally beg. The circumstances of his dissatisfaction. "Let me come to my senses," said Michael, rather rudely. She fell behind him because she knew it was best not to piss him off in that state. She came back to him an hour later when Michael's face had gone from angry to lost. He told her everything that had happened, and that your sister couldn't come to see your mother. It's good that your mother was with someone close to you when she died. You can finally get rid of the guilt. "Really?" Christina asked. "Yes, Christina. The only problem is that my sister Kelly died 10 years ago," Michael summarized. "No one would recognize her from the photo. It couldn't have been Kelly. Besides, there was nothing left of her in the coffin either." He threw the mug and it shattered. Christina stood there like a thunderclap, stunned, still trying to comprehend what she'd heard. Some black realtors must have taken advantage of the fact that my mother didn't remember anything, so they made a farce of it. Oh God, I don't know. What if she was sick? She was a month and a half before she died. She thought she had her daughter with her. She didn't even remember that her daughter was long dead. She didn't even remember that it took her so long to die. It just doesn't make sense, Michael said. He threw his head back, bumping painfully against the wall. But that didn't bother him now. He sat there, thinking about what had happened and trying to figure out how to handle the situation. So he'd have to go to the police. Then we'll find out who got everything. Maybe they just rewrote the house. Your mother has several apartments as far as I remember, and all old people have an account where they put money for years, Christina said with a shrug. Apparently she was trying to find something to hold on to. He looked at her with a completely hopeless look. He had thought he would have to settle inheritance issues, sell the apartments, take care of the house. And now it turned out that in all probability he would get nothing at all. And what can the police do? It's a certified document that says in black and white that everything goes to Kathy. So you don't know any of Kathy's family? Christina asked. I remember Kathy, but not Kathy. And what does she care about my mother? How many years has it been? I don't know. We should probably wait for her on the day of the reading of the will, Michael said. They talked for another half hour or so before they changed the subject. Michael had pretty much deflated by now, calmed down. Could talk normally. It was hard, but he tried to keep his cool. For the first time in a long time, he was able to sleep. But in the morning, an interesting idea came into his head. Michael, having secured the support of an old acquaintance, decided to talk to him about what had happened, to find out in advance whether it was worth going to the police. David was waiting for him at the station for an informal conversation. Even though Michael had done nothing wrong, for some reason, being in the police station made him uncomfortable, as if he were here against his will. "Look, David," what if Michael started to talk, but a man interrupted him. "No, Michael, since you're here, just tell it like it is." "No assumptions," David said with a wry grin. The thick scar that crossed his nose was frightening. It marred the once handsome face of Michael's former classmate. "Okay, it's just a stupid situation. Anyway, Maria's mother had an illness. She was so sick, she couldn't remember anything after an hour. I'd leave notes all over the house. I always came with a picture of us so she'd have a chance to recognize me. Anyway, I went away on a business trip, came back 2 months later. And my mother was gone," Michael said. And he paused. David momentarily had the smile blown off his face. He handed water to his former classmate and now listened much more attentively. "In the will, it is all normal, signed, certified. That is not a forgery. It says that everything goes to another person. And I don't know this person. Can I do anything?" Michael asked. "In theory, you can write a report. An investigation will begin," said David, shrugging his shoulders. "But in practice," Michael clarified. "And in practice, there's absolutely nothing you can do." "Michael, if everything is certified, signed, no one will approve anything for you. Am I right to understand that you have not been with your mother for the last months? Even if they ask the neighbors, they will all confirm that they bequeathed to someone else that you were not around. In these matters, everything is very sharp. Almost nothing can be proved," said David. Michael leaned back in his chair and looked somewhere to the side. His gaze was hard. When he looked at David again, he was focused. He left the office and came back about 10 minutes later. "It's not gonna work. Michael, there's no felony. You just didn't get the inheritance. Whoever it was did a very clean job. There was something you could have done if you'd gotten some sort of disability, as if to confirm that your mother couldn't live on her own," David said, gently sidestepping the urgency of the situation. "Are you saying I left my mother in a dire situation?" asked Michael grudgingly. "The only thing I'm saying is that you have no chance of proving anything. If you want to file a report, call me. But I won't promise anything," said David. Michael left the office in an even more shattered state than he had been before. It was hard to believe that all this would go unpunished. At home, Christina tried to cheer him up, to calm him down. But Michael was in a state where no one could help him. Everything inside of him was boiling all the time. Now and then, Michael went to the balcony, stood there, waiting for him to calm down. He did not want to yell at his future wife, and certainly did not want to ruin relations with her. Because of his temper, he could spend hours in his office, listening to his own thoughts flow. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Michael knew exactly who Kathy was, but the last name didn't add up, and that she would come all the way out here? For what? For home? I don't think it was worth it. She couldn't have calculated in advance that she would arrive and leave before Michael returned. The man didn't just feel cheated. He felt as if he'd been broken into. On the day of the announcement of the will, Michael was already standing outside an hour before the appointed time. He couldn't even sit in the car. Frost, a light rain. There was a real storm on his mind. The man who was to announce and explain everything entered the room. Assistant Michael followed him. "I've already called the other side. I understand you'll be alone tonight. I don't know why you're here. I don't know why your mother changed her will and appointed a different trustee for the funeral. 2 apartments in the center of the counting house. Everything went to Kathy. I don't know what you want to know or get from me," in a tired voice, the older man said. "I want to know who Kathy is," Michael said insistently. "Look, I've got a dozen people like you. You come, you resent me, you argue with me. But I can't do anything about it, you know. All I can do is announce a will that's already been prepared. If you want to deal with her, look for her. She'll probably show up at the house soon to put it up for sale. That's the way it's usually done." The man spoke again in a tired voice, showing no emotion at all. Michael did not even speak to him. He jumped out, but immediately looked at the secretary and stopped. "Can I get the phone number mentioned in the will?" he asked. The girl shook her head negatively. Michael went outside. He got into the car and immediately grabbed the vibrating cell phone. "Michael, it's Aunt Adriana over there. You might have time to talk to her," Adriana said. "Thank you so much." "You can't imagine how much you're helping me out," Michael said. He had probably never driven so fast to his mother's village before. Michael just flew down the highway, not even afraid of getting a ticket. And now all he wanted was to see the face of the girl or woman who had gotten it all. When the car finally stopped outside the house, when he burst into the house, he was stunned. Standing before him was the very Kathy he had suspected just a few days ago. He couldn't believe it was her. Slimmed down, all grown up. She had a different, grown-up face. Michael thought he was going to scare the girl, but he didn't. Kathy didn't even seem surprised that he was here. "So it's you. Since when are you Kathy?" he asked. "If you remembered anything other than getting up my skirt, you'd know that's my real last name," he said. She was looking at him like a wildcat. It was as if she were ready to pounce on him at any possible second. "I don't understand," Michael said. But he didn't have time to finish. "Of course you do, Michael. How can you understand? Have you forgotten how you took me against my will? Forget how you played the relationship game. As long as I don't report you." "I remember everything, Michael," Kathy screamed. She took a few steps back, and Michael backed away too. He opened his mouth in shock, not knowing what to say for himself. He had grown up, matured, and tried not to remember the situation. Or what? "Michael? Don't you remember when I had a baby with you? Or did you forget the baby was born?" Kathy continued to scream in pain. Now the puzzle in Michael's head was coming together. One by one, he went through the memories in his head. He simultaneously hated himself and at the same time did not understand why she had decided to do such an immoral act. "I didn't do anything wrong. I followed you and realized you didn't care about your mother at all. I thought she only had a house. I had no idea about the apartments or the bank account. I didn't do it all for me. I did it all for him. I'll sell everything, buy him tickets, pay for his surgery and full rehab. My son will be healthy," Kathy said. "I'd say our son, but you don't care about him." The man, who was absorbing every word, looked around stupidly. It was as if he was looking for support in the empty house. Only now he noticed that there was almost nothing left that reminded him of his mother. "Weren't you ashamed to pretend to be my dead sister?" Michael asked. "Your mother didn't care. Whether I was her real daughter or not. I cared about her. I was willing to be with her for years, even though I knew about the diagnosis. By the time you came back from vacation, she wouldn't even remember you, wouldn't let you in, and I would have been with her until the end. I didn't ask her to rewrite anything. I was just hoping for a deed of gift on the house," Kathy said. Her voice got a little quieter. Apparently her confidence had faded. Michael raised his hands conciliatorily, as if to show that he was not going to attack her. But Kathy was still holding the long cane-shaped umbrella tightly in her hands. Was she gripping the handle so hard that her knuckles shared? "That's not fair. Kathy is my mother, after all. It was all supposed to go to me," he said. "And now it's going to a child you don't want. Remember when I told you about my son's diagnosis? Did you tell me you didn't want a handicapped child? It's easy for you to have a healthy baby. I can keep this one. Yes, what I did was completely immoral. But my child will have a life. And I'm willing to go to jail for that," Kathy said. Michael did not know how to justify what he had said in the past. Kathy tried to get around him, but he blocked her exit. She looked as if she was looking for something else to defend herself with. He wanted more explanations from her, something to appeal to. "There's nothing you can do, Michael. No court will help you. Every neighbor here will speak in my favor. Maybe I'm not his own daughter. And that before she died, your mom wasn't alone. She was with someone she thought was her own daughter. You should have seen how happy she was here every day," said Kathy. "I'm sure you'll think about it, or I'll go through the courts," said Michael. "You'll persist in taking money from your own son." "Wow, that's interesting. And in court, I'm a fiduciary," said Kathy. She shoved him with her shoulder and sprinted out into the street. Michael wouldn't dare make a scandal in the street. Too much he depended on public opinion. The man stepped out onto the porch and looked around, as if afraid to see the neighbors. "You'll learn a lesson from life. Don't forget, every mouse will be hung by its tail," said Michael. "And I don't care if my baby lives." "Michael, the baby you left behind," said Kathy. She got in the car and wanted to pull forward, but he jumped out in seconds right in front of the car. She pushed him lightly with her bumper and then hit the brake. He came closer, but the girl blocked the door. "Kathy, you tricked her. You tricked me with the law. You think you're gonna get away with it. You're wrong if you think you can get away with this," he shouted. But Kathy backed up. Michael, who had rolled onto the car, fell forward and dropped his knees into the dusty road. Kathy turned the car around and then just drove off, leaving him all alone. Michael was still in complete shock and prostration. He was piecing together what had happened in his head and could not justify Kathy, himself, or the behavior of the neighbors who suddenly believed in the existence of his daughter. Even though he himself had moved his mother here a short time ago, no one knew that his sister had died long ago. The man got into the car, came to his head to the steering wheel, then looked at the house, near which there was now a sign that read "For sale." He drove home slowly, barely breaking the speed limit, the allowable threshold. Michael entered the apartment, plopped down on the bed with his clothes on. No explanations or stories. Christina was up to her neck in work. When she was free, Michael was already able to get up and take a shower. But there was no energy to eat. She set the small coffee table in the living room. It was only after that he was able to tell her everything. Christina was shocked that he had a child, and even more shocked that he had abandoned him to his fate. This was the man she was going to marry. "I accused her of having a baby, of running away sick. I lied to her about going on a business trip to earn money for the baby's surgery." Michael was adamant about not calling the baby his son. He must be about 3 years old now. Christina looked at her future husband with all eyes digesting the information and not understanding how he could not have told her about it earlier. "Don't get me wrong. It's not all that simple. I really do realize how wild it looks from the outside," but he started to speak. However, Christina interrupted him. "Leave everything as it is and establish a relationship with the child. After all, you are his father. Consider that God has saved you a kind of forgiveness from above for your Turkish act," she coined. Christina pictured with horror how Kathy had once been left alone with a sick child and a noodle from the man she loved. She imagined how the young girl had fought the system, suffered to get any allowance for the baby. Her throat constricted at the thought that all this time Michael had just been living like nothing had happened. "Do you realize how much money there is out there?" he asked. "What kind of money is there, Michael?" "A little house and 2 tiny apartments in the center. God helped the baby to have enough for the operation. You're still thinking about money after all this? You have no idea how disappointed I am in you," Christina said. That night she packed up, left the apartment, and never returned. They were only able to reconcile a few weeks later, when Christina had already experienced the situation internally. Michael really decided to leave things as they were, but he never wanted to communicate with the child. He didn't want to know that he had a disabled child. Didn't want to suffer watching the baby's life destroyed. He chickened out, to put it simply. Their relationship with Christina changed dramatically. The woman was afraid that when she gave birth and the baby was unwell, and Michael was out of the picture, no, he convinced her that things would be very different. But as they say, statistics don't lie. Christina got in touch, found Kathy, and talked to her about everything that had happened. It turned out that the money from the sale of the apartment and the house was just enough for the surgery, the rehab, and a little vacation she had planned for a year from now, when everything would be behind her. What she said. "Will she file for alimony?" Michael asked. When Christina's conversation ended, Christina looked with pity at the man who now caused her only disgust. And how could she have loved him? It was sickening to think of letting him go to her, of accepting his offer. His son was about to undergo the heaviest surgery in another country, a long rehabilitation. All he cared about was whether he'd have alimony. The surgery was a success. The kid recovered very quickly. Quality rehabilitation helped him gradually return to normal life. By the age of 4, the little boy already looked like a quite healthy child. Of course, by that time, Kathy managed to earn money, but already on his small business. So they had enough for a vacation. She could not be happy that she got such a chance in life. Michael and Christina separated because the woman could not look at her failed husband with other eyes after the situation. Michael has found a new partner and has already made sure that she does not know anything about his past.